Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, here to share a chilling tale tonight. I know many of you use these stories to unwind or drift off, so before we dive in, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Oh, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it where you are? Get cozy, take a deep breath, and let's begin. That night, I was working alone in the office, close to midnight. My desk lamp cast a small pool of light onto the cluttered workspace, while the rest of the wide-open office felt darker than usual, almost oppressive. I leaned back, stretching out the tightness in my shoulders. The quiet hum of my computer's fan blended with the steady buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. I'd stayed late plenty of times before to wrap up paperwork and finish emails, but this night felt different, heavier somehow. Every little noise made me flinch. My eyes kept drifting to the large windows overlooking the empty street, searching for any sign of movement. But the street was lifeless, and each glance made me feel more unsettled. Around 11:30, I decided to take a break and get some coffee from the break room at the far end of the hall. As I walked down the corridor, the flickering hallway lights made the place feel even more eerie. My footsteps echoed loudly, and I realized how silent the building was. I could hear my breathing loud and clear. The coffee was bitter and stale, but I drank it anyway, hoping it would keep me alert for another hour or so. When I returned to my desk, I tried to focus on the spreadsheets on my screen. I typed a few lines, but restlessness crept in. My eyes kept darting to the clock in the corner of my monitor, the minute hand inching closer to midnight. The office suddenly felt colder than usual. The small heater beneath my desk didn't help at all. I rubbed my hands together, trying to warm them up. At some point, I stood and walked around, hoping to shake the tension. I passed empty cubicles and stopped at the big window near the entrance. The distant city lights looked far away, and I felt a strange unease working so late, all alone. Then, out of nowhere, the phone on my desk rang. The sudden, sharp ring shattered the silence. I froze. That phone wasn't even connected anymore. It was just an old relic we kept around, since everything was on cell phones and internet systems now. But it rang again, a cold, metallic sound that echoed through the empty office. My heart pounded, and my palms sweated as I slowly approached the desk, torn between ignoring the call and answering out of curiosity. I picked up the receiver. At first, I heard only static. Then, heavy breathing, slow, uneven breaths, as if someone was standing right next to me, breathing into the phone. No words, just that unnerving sound. My throat tightened. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. Suddenly, a click, the line went dead. I held the receiver for a few seconds, my pulse racing and a chill creeping up my spine. When I put it down, my fingers trembled as if the plastic might slip away. I looked around the office, half expecting to see someone hiding, but there was nothing. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, my desk lamp flickered softly, and the phone sat quietly, as if nothing had happened. The stairwell was dimly lit, but I could make out enough to move safely. I descended one floor, ears straining for any unusual sounds. All I heard was the echo of my own footsteps and the rhythm of my breathing. No one else was around. Frustrated and tense, I forced myself to climb back up. Once I reached my floor, I decided it was time to call it quits. I started shutting down my laptop and stuffing papers into my bag. I was eager to leave. Just as I powered off my computer, a faint scraping noise came from somewhere behind me. I whirled around, but no one was there. The sound was so soft that I questioned whether it had even happened. Holding my breath in short, uneven gasps, my mind raced with explanations. Maybe a maintenance worker was moving something, or a door had creaked loose. But no matter what, an unsettling feeling had settled deep in my stomach. I returned to the phone and lifted the receiver. Silence, no dial tone. I hung up, debating whether to leave immediately. But then I remembered there was a crucial file saved on a shared drive. I had to log back in to grab it. My fingers felt stiff and clumsy on the keyboard, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. Suddenly, the printer across the room clicked. I jumped at the sound, my heart pounding. The printer was just restarting, but in that moment, it felt like it was taunting me. Finally, the file finished downloading. I slid my USB drive into my jacket pocket, zipped up my bag, and headed for the elevator. The hallway seemed longer than usual, and the faint glow of the elevator button barely lit my finger as I pressed it. I heard the cables creak, then the elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the ground floor, and waited. As the doors closed and the elevator began its slow descent, my reflection in the metal panel caught my eye. I looked pale, and my shirt clung to my back with sweat. Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I fumbled it out and saw an unknown number flashing on the screen. My stomach twisted tight. I debated ignoring the call, but curiosity got the better of me. I swiped to answer and whispered, "Hello." Silence. Then, I caught a single breath, like someone leaning close to a microphone, right next to my ear. I snapped, "Stop calling me," but there was no reply, just a low, static hum. Then the line went dead. The elevator chimed as it reached the ground floor, and the doors slid open. The lobby was deserted. The night security guard's desk was empty. Sometimes they'd step out for a smoke, but something about the emptiness felt off. I crossed the shiny tile floor, the echo of my footsteps bouncing back at me. I pushed open the front doors, and a blast of cold night air hit my face. I hurried toward my car in the parking lot. The lot was mostly dark except for a few flickering street lamps, and I felt exposed, like I was an easy target. I thought I heard a faint ringing, but maybe it was just in my head. Once inside the car, I locked the doors immediately. My hands trembled as I started the engine and pulled out faster than I intended. The roads were nearly empty, and every traffic light seemed to turn green just for me. I made it home quicker than usual. All the way there, I kept glancing at my rearview mirror, half expecting headlights to appear behind me. But the road stayed empty. When I got into my apartment, I flipped on every light I could find. I closed the blinds, double-checked every lock, and made sure no windows were open. My heart was still pounding. I dropped my bag on the couch and sat down, trying to slow my breathing. My phone lay on the coffee table, and I stared at it, half expecting it to ring again. But it stayed silent. Relief mixed with lingering fear. I stood and grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, gulping down half of it. My throat was dry, my mouth sour from stress. I paced my living room, glancing at my phone every few minutes, hoping no call slipped through. None came. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? No clear threat. No sign of a break-in at the office. It wasn't a typical emergency. So, I fiddled with my keychain, trying to calm myself down. My mind replayed the moment of that breath on the line. Who could have been on the other end? Eventually, I took a quick shower, hoping the hot water would ease the tension. My shoulders were tight, my neck muscles sore. I washed my face, slipped into fresh clothes, and left every light on in the bedroom. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening for any noise. Every click from the air conditioner or hum from the fridge made my pulse spike. My phone was beside me, and every time the screen lit up with a notification, my heart leapt. But it was never a call, just emails or app alerts. Sleep barely came. The next morning, I woke groggy and still on edge. I showed up at the office around 10 a.m., later than usual. My co-workers were chatting and laughing like everything was normal. I went straight to my desk and checked the old phone, still disconnected, no signs of recent activity. A surge of anger washed over me. Confused, I mentioned the strange phone call to a co-worker, but they just shrugged it off, acting like I'd imagined the whole thing. They insisted the phone wasn't connected to any line. I even went back to the server room to double-check, everything was exactly as I'd left it, with no active cables hooked up to that old phone. The rest of the day, I felt on edge, paranoid. Every time I passed by that phone, I half expected it to ring again. It never did, but I couldn't shake the memory of the heavy breathing, the faint clicking, and the unsettling sensation that someone was right behind me. Even though I wrapped up my work early and left before sunset, that night stuck with me. I still work in that office now, but I refuse to stay late anymore. If something urgent comes up, I take it home and finish it there. I don't answer that phone anymore, in fact, I shove it under a pile of dusty old files and avoid looking at it altogether. I'm not sure if what happened was a glitch or some sick prank. All I know is, I've never heard a phone ring in an empty building like that, and I hope I never do again. I first saw the house on a Tuesday afternoon. It looked normal enough, a small, single-story home with peeling paint on the siding and a narrow driveway leading up to a tiny garage. I stepped out of my car and circled the property, peering at the windows to make sure none were cracked. I checked the roof for leaks. Everything seemed in decent shape. The real estate agent said the house had been empty for 6 months. That didn't bother me, I just needed something cheap and close to work. I signed the lease right then and there. It felt like a good decision at the time. I moved in a week later. The first few days were uneventful. I unpacked boxes, set up my bed, and arranged the furniture in the small living room. The kitchen was cramped, and the stove looked old, but it worked. The bathroom's water pressure was weak, but manageable. The only thing that unsettled me was the garage. It was attached to the side of the house, connected to the kitchen by a thin metal door. Inside, the garage was dark and narrow, with dusty cinder block walls and spider webs packed into the corners. Dead bugs littered the baseboards, and the concrete floor was stained in places. I figured I'd clean it out eventually, but it wasn't a priority. On my third night in the house, I woke up around 2 a.m., thirsty. I rolled out of bed, shuffled to the kitchen, and filled a glass with water. Just as I set the glass down, I heard a faint noise. At first, I thought it might be a cat outside. But the sound was closer, a soft footstep or scraping on concrete. I froze and listened. The noise came again, from the garage door, a single thump, like someone shifting their weight carefully on the floor. I crept over and pressed my ear to the door. Then I heard something else, a scraping sound, like a foot being dragged across the concrete. My heart hammered in my chest. I thought about opening the door, but fear held me back. Instead, I flipped on the kitchen light. The noise stopped immediately. I waited, heart pounding, but nothing else came. My throat tightened. I switched the light off and stayed still for a moment, trying to sense any movement. When nothing happened, I told myself it was just my imagination. I went back to bed but lay awake for over an hour before finally drifting off. The next morning, I checked the garage. Nothing seemed unusual. The webs and dusty corners were exactly as before. I looked for footprints, scuff marks, or any sign that someone had been inside. There was nothing, no footprints, no disturbed cobwebs, nothing. Everything appeared normal. I sighed, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. Relieved, I told myself it was just late-night nerves. That afternoon, I decided to upgrade the lock on the door between the kitchen and the garage. The old knob lock was flimsy, and the key barely felt secure. At the hardware store, I picked out a deadbolt with a sturdier mechanism. Back home, I installed it myself, making sure the frame was solid and the bolt slid smoothly. I tested it several times, locking and unlocking, until it felt secure. That night, I cooked a quick dinner and tried not to think about the garage. Around 11 p.m., I double-checked all the doors and windows, then went to bed. Sometime after midnight, I jolted awake. My eyes snapped open, and I stared at the ceiling, unsettled. At first, there was silence. I forced myself to lie still and listen. Then I heard it, a faint rattle, like metal scraping against metal. Soft but steady, coming from the kitchen door that led to the garage. My heart pounded as I slid out of bed, bare feet cold against the floor. I crept toward the kitchen, every step tense. Standing about 5 feet from the door, I squinted into the darkness, watching the doorknob. A thin strip of moonlight filtered through a small window, illuminating the door's edge. The knob trembled, as if someone was jiggling it on the other side. I froze, hands shaking, breath shallow. Then I remembered the deadbolt. I'd locked it from the inside. That meant no one could open the door from outside, not without breaking something. But the knob was definitely moving. A surge of adrenaline rushed through me. I wanted to flip on the kitchen light, but feared it might provoke whoever, or whatever, was there. I stood in the dark, eyes glued to the trembling knob. After a few seconds, the movement stopped. My legs felt weak, and I had an overwhelming urge to flee back to my bedroom and slam the door. But I forced myself to stay. After a minute of silence, I quietly backed away, grabbed a flashlight from a drawer, and retreated to my bedroom. I locked the door and sat on the bed, flashlight in hand, wide-eyed. I barely slept that night. At dawn, I dressed and headed straight to the kitchen to inspect the door. The deadbolt was still engaged, just as I'd left it. I unlocked it, opened the door, and stepped into the garage. My shoes crunched on stray gravel, dust floated in the cold air. The stale smell lingered. Nothing looked disturbed, except a fresh cluster of spider webs that seemed to have appeared overnight. I checked the outside garage door leading to the driveway. It was shut tight, the slide lock inside still in place. No broken windows. No forced entries. Confused, I tried to let it go. That evening, anxious about going to sleep, I stayed up watching TV at low volume. By midnight, exhaustion hit me hard, so I finally turned off the lights and headed to bed. This time, I decided to lock the garage door again, but with a small twist. I placed a piece of tape firmly over the latch. If anyone tried to open it, the tape would move, revealing tampering. I pressed it down, locked the deadbolt, jiggled the knob to confirm it was secure, and walked away. I didn't hear a thing that night. But when I woke up the next morning, I rushed to the kitchen. My stomach dropped. The tape lay curled on the floor. The deadbolt was unlocked. The doorknob was twisted, metal warped like someone had gripped it with incredible force. From the inside, the edges bent inward, almost crushed. But the door itself was unharmed. No dents, no splintered frame. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The garage was silent, dimly lit by morning sun filtering through a grimy window near the ceiling. I could see my breath in the chilly air. Nothing seemed different at first, until I noticed more spider webs had been cleared away in one corner. Tiny shards of broken web lay scattered on the floor, as if someone had brushed them aside. I swallowed hard, tension knotting my chest. My hands felt clammy, so I wiped them on my pants. I walked over and looked closely. No footprints, but a faint smudge in the dust, maybe a shoe print. Too blurry to tell for sure. I scanned the walls for hidden holes or entrances. Nothing unusual, just old cinder blocks and some cracks. The overhead light didn't work, so I relied on the pale daylight. Each step echoed softly. The air felt colder than usual. I needed answers. I went back inside, grabbed my phone, and called the real estate agent. After a few rings, she answered. I asked if there had ever been reports of trespassers or strange break-ins. She said she hadn't heard of any but promised to check with the landlord. I thanked her, hung up, and stood staring at the kitchen door. I decided to buy a surveillance camera, the only sensible step. I drove to an electronics store, picked up a basic model that records to an SD card, and installed it facing the kitchen door. It had night vision, so I hoped it would catch anything strange during the night. Then I replaced the twisted doorknob with a new one and installed another deadbolt, a different brand, just to feel safer. By the time I finished, I was exhausted. Covered in sweat and dust, my arms aching, I felt a flicker of calm. At least the camera might catch whoever, or whatever, was trying to open that door. I ate a quick dinner, then set up a small TV tray in the living room, placing the camera's receiver on it. The screen showed a live feed of the kitchen door. I could see the doorknob clearly and part of the garage door behind it. I left the camera rolling, double-checked the SD card had enough space for several hours, then locked everything up and tried to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke with a jolt. My heart raced, but I heard nothing unusual. I glanced at the camera feed on the small screen beside the couch. The kitchen was dark and silent. The doorknob didn't move. I stayed there for a few minutes, yawning but alert. Nothing changed. I turned off the screen and went back to bed. The next morning, I went straight to review the footage. Fast forwarding through the night, my eyes darted across the screen. At first, all was quiet. Then, at 3:07 a.m., the doorknob started to shake. No one appeared in the frame. The door just rattled on its own. Suddenly, the feed cut to static for a few seconds. When the image returned, the doorknob was warped, twisted just like before. The deadbolt was open. The tape I'd put on the latch was gone. I watched the rest of the footage closely. No intruder. No figure. No clue how the door had been unlocked. I replayed the static segment, hoping to catch something. Only white noise filled those 4 seconds. A wave of fear hit me. My legs went weak. I set the camera down and stared at the real door. It was still locked. But the footage showed otherwise. I walked over, and my breath caught in my throat. Sure enough, the deadbolt was unlatched. The doorknob twisted again, the metal crushed and bent inward. Even though I'd just installed a new one, it looked exactly the same. Hands trembling, I pulled the door open and stepped into the garage. The space was empty and quiet. The morning sun filtered through a grimy window, lighting up swirling dust. More spider webs had been disturbed in one corner. The slide lock on the outside garage door remained firmly in place. I spent the next hour searching every inch. I knocked on the walls, feeling for hidden compartments. I scanned the ceiling, looking for trapdoors. Nothing. Just a narrow, dirty concrete garage. Anxiety clawed at my chest. I locked the door behind me and grabbed my car keys. I drove around the neighborhood, debating whether to call the police. But what would I say? No break-in. No damage beyond the doorknob. No one caught on camera. It sounded insane. Back home, I called a locksmith. He arrived early afternoon. I showed him the twisted knob and door. He inspected the frame, the new deadbolt, the latch. He couldn't see any sign of tools. The metal looked crushed, like gripped by incredible strength. He shrugged, replaced the knob and deadbolt with higher-grade parts, and charged me extra. I watched him work, nerves rising every time he glanced at the damaged knob. When he asked what happened, I just said, "I found it like this." He nodded and left. After he left, I tested the new lock and knob repeatedly. Everything worked smoothly. I repositioned the camera directly across from the door for a clearer view. I locked the garage door and sat at the kitchen table, eyes glued to the door, waiting. In broad daylight, nothing happened. Eventually, I sighed and tried to go about my day. But those footsteps. That rattling knob. They haunted me. I still live here. The garage is still narrow, dark, filled with webs. I never leave my car inside anymore. I park on the street. Every night, I lock the door, double-check the deadbolts, and set up the camera. Every morning, I check the footage. Sometimes, around 3 a.m., there's a few seconds of static. When the picture returns, the lock is open. Or the knob is bent. But there's never anyone there. The landlord has no answers. Neither do I. I don't know how long I'll stay. For now, I keep the door locked. Though it feels pointless. My heart pounds every time I hear a noise after midnight. And I can't shake the feeling. Something's waiting inside that garage. I stopped at a roadside motel because my eyes felt too heavy to keep open. I had no patience for fancy places, I just needed a bed. All I wanted was a hot shower and a lock on the door. The motel sign flickered in a sketchy, uneven way, and the parking lot looked almost deserted. I spotted a single dusty car tucked into one corner, and a battered pickup truck parked near the entrance. The building's walls were chipped and stained, and the neon light outside buzzed incessantly. I didn't think much of it. I parked close to the reception, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The man behind the front desk was older, probably in his late 60s. He wore a stained polo shirt and had a tired, worn expression. He spoke in a low, gravelly voice and barely glanced at me. The check-in was quick. He handed me a key and told me my room was down the hall on the left. I asked about food nearby, but he just shrugged. Apparently, nothing was open late. So, I grabbed a stale candy bar from the vending machine by the entrance and made my way to room 107. The hallway carpet was worn thin, and a faint smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with something musty lingered in the air. Inside my room was a simple setup, a bed with a thin blanket, a tiny table, and a single chair. An old box-style TV sat on a wooden dresser. The walls were a pale yellow, faded from paint or age, I wasn't sure. A small window looked out onto a narrow strip of gravel and a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Beyond that, I could see some trees and a patch of tall grass. Not exactly a view to write home about, but I didn't care. I tossed my duffel bag onto the chair and sat on the bed. The springs creaked beneath me. A cold draft made me shiver. I got up and checked the window, it was locked tight. I decided to take a quick shower. The bathroom light flickered once before settling into a dull glow. The mirror had a crack along the edge, and the towels were thin and stiff. Water pressure was decent, temperature okay. While washing my face, I thought I heard something outside, footsteps crunching on gravel. I turned off the water and listened hard, but the silence was absolute. It felt like the air was holding its breath, waiting. I brushed it off. Dried off, I changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt. Back in the bedroom, I flipped through TV channels. The reception was grainy, the sound buzzing oddly. I settled on some late-night talk show, but the audio was distracting, I couldn't focus. Uneasy, I glanced at the window. My reflection stared back, and just beyond the fence, I thought I saw a strange shape. The interior light made it hard to see clearly. Maybe it was a shadow from a tree. I told myself not to get paranoid. I turned off the TV and got into bed, pulling the thin blanket up to my chest. I closed my eyes, trying to relax. But my mind kept drifting to that shape, crouched low, almost like someone was watching me. I took a deep breath and shifted. The mattress felt lumpy, springs popping with every move. Eventually, I fell asleep. Sometime around 1 or 2 a.m., a cold chill woke me. My eyes snapped open. The room was dark except for the faint red glow of the alarm clock on the nightstand. My heart pounded, but I wasn't sure why. Then I looked toward the window. There, crouched on the other side of the glass, was a dark outline. Not tall, but shaped like a person, hunched low and completely still. My stomach tightened, chest constricted. I started to sweat. The figure didn't move. I couldn't see a face, just a silhouette. I reached for the lamp but fumbled, knocking it over. It clattered against the table. When the light finally came on, the silhouette was gone. My mouth went dry. I stood, walked to the window, and peered outside. There was the fence, the patch of grass, the same trees. Nothing else. No footprints. No sign of anyone. I told myself it was my imagination. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe a passing car's shadow had tricked me. I checked the clock, 2:13 a.m. I wanted to sleep, but my pulse raced. My arms trembled. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. Eventually, I lay back down and forced my eyes shut until I drifted off. Morning came too soon. I got dressed, left my key at the front desk, and headed to a nearby diner for breakfast. I felt exhausted, as if I'd barely slept. The coffee was weak. The eggs overcooked. I didn't care. My mind was still on the figure outside. Part of me believed it was just my imagination. After all, that fence behind the motel looked secure. Who would want to lurk back there? I returned to the motel that afternoon for my second night. The same older man was at the front desk. I told him I'd be staying another night and asked about the fenced area. He said it was a private zone the motel used for storage, no public access. It was always locked. When I mentioned seeing someone outside, he gave me a blank stare and shrugged. "There's nobody back there," he said flatly. "We keep it locked all the time." His tone offered no reassurance. I felt uneasy but tried to brush it off. I spent the afternoon driving around, trying to distract myself. I stopped at a gas station, bought snacks, and planned the rest of my road trip. I had no strict schedule but wanted to reach the next city by the weekend. I thought about finding a different motel for the second night. But I'd already paid, and the hassle wasn't worth it. I told myself it was just paranoia and exhaustion. Back in my room, the bed was made, and the towels were fresh. Everything else looked the same. I closed the curtains, double-checked the window lock, and tested the door several times. Trying to stay calm, I sat on the bed and turned on the TV. I watched some random sitcom, but my eyes kept flicking to the window. My hands were cold. My heart thumped faster every time I heard a noise, a car passing, a door closing in the hallway. Around midnight, I got ready for bed. I shut off the TV and turned off the lights. I switched off the lights and settled under the blanket. The constant hum of traffic on the nearby highway was quieter than the night before, and I felt myself drifting toward sleep. Then, I heard it, a soft scraping sound at the window. My eyes snapped open, pulse spiking. I stayed perfectly still, listening. The scratch was slow and deliberate, like something brushing against the glass. My skin tingled. I slid out of bed, keeping my body low in the dark, hoping whatever was out there wouldn't see me. I leaned close to the window, heart pounding in my ears. I heard something, a soft exhale, almost like a breath. My palms were sweaty. I reached for the lamp switch, flicked it on, and pulled the curtain aside in one swift motion. Nothing. I looked left and right, then banged on the window, hoping to scare someone off. Silence. Just the fence, the still grass, and the faint glow of the motel's back lamp. I stood there a moment, breathing hard, then moved back to the bed and sat down, trying to calm my racing mind. My arms felt weak. Anxiety tingled through my legs. I considered going to the front desk but figured the old man would just shrug. Instead, I decided to stay awake, watching the window until morning. I turned on the TV, kept the volume low, and propped myself against the headboard with a pillow. My eyelids grew heavy. After a couple of hours, the last time I glanced at the clock, it was almost 3 a.m. Before I knew it, I was out. The next morning, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a reminder for an appointment a few days away in another city. My neck was stiff and my back ached from sleeping upright. I rubbed my eyes, looked around. The room hadn't changed. The window was locked, curtains slightly parted to let in a sliver of morning light. I stood and looked outside. The grass and trees were still there. No footprints. The fence appeared untouched. At the front desk, I hoped for a different staff member but saw the same old man staring at a small TV behind the counter. I asked if there were security cameras behind the motel. He said there were some older cameras at the front but none in the back because it was a locked area. I asked about someone climbing over the fence. He told me the barbed wire made it almost impossible. "You're seeing things," he said flatly. "This place is quiet." His voice was void of concern. My nerves jumped again. I looked around the empty lobby, the vending machine humming, a single overhead light buzzing. "I know what I saw," I said, trying to sound calm. "There was a shape crouched outside my window. Twice." He shrugged. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Is there any other entrance back there?" a way for someone to sneak in. He shook his head. No, sir. That door, he pointed to a small side door, is locked. Only staff has the key, and I'm the only one here tonight. Uneasy, I decided to check out early. I told the manager. He didn't argue, just handed me the bill and looked bored. The total was more than I expected, but I didn't care, I just wanted to leave. Back in my room, I gathered my things and paused by the window one last time. A chill ran down my arms. I stared at the fence, imagining someone hunched there. My body tensed, but it was daylight. Everything looked normal. I locked my suitcase, grabbed my bag, and left. The hallway was silent. No other guests. The parking lot held only my car and that battered pickup. It felt wrong. I tossed my bags in the trunk, got in, and started the engine. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I caught movement, the curtains in the window right of mine fluttered. Maybe it was the AC. Maybe someone was standing there. I couldn't tell. I pulled out onto the highway, gripping the steering wheel tightly. My chest felt tight. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see something following. Nothing. The road stretched ahead. I told myself I was safe. My body relaxed once I put distance between me and that motel. But the memory lingered like a bad taste. I don't know what I saw out there. I don't know if it was a person who'd somehow gotten past the fence, or something else entirely. But I remember the crouched figure. The chilling sense of presence. How it vanished the moment the light came on. How the manager insisted the area was locked tight. I can't forget my pounding heart or the dread that stole my sleep. That's all I've got, a few lost hours and a memory that makes my skin crawl. Even now, every time I see a window at night, I check. Is something crouched there, waiting to be seen? I always thought closing time at the restaurant would be simple. Wipe down tables, lock doors, check the cash register, and go home. But after that first night, when I heard scratching sounds in the basement, everything changed. Now I dread the last hour of every shift. Because I know what's waiting under the floor. I can handle rowdy customers, broken glasses, and stress, but that noise gets under my skin. It always happens when I'm alone, with no one to back me up. I've tried to blame it on loose pipes or an old ventilation system. But every time I turn on the basement light, my stomach tightens. Let me tell you exactly what I've been dealing with. I started working at this small family-owned restaurant about 6 months ago. It's a standard layout, a cozy dining area, a small bar near the entrance, a kitchen in the back, and a staircase leading to the basement used mostly for storage. The basement has cheap white tiles on the walls, a few shelves for dry goods, and an extra refrigerator for overflow items like sauces and dressings. The ceiling is low. The fluorescent lights flicker if left on too long. It smells musty, damp cardboard mixed with cleaning supplies. At first, it was just another room in a place that paid me decently. About a month ago, I had my first encounter with the sound. It was around 11 p.m. I was the last person on the clock. Our closing routine is simple: lock the front door, turn off the dining area lights, shut down registers, clean the kitchen, then do one last check downstairs. I was in the kitchen, about to leave, when I heard it, a faint scraping, like nails or claws dragging against a hard surface. It was distinct enough to make me freeze. I looked around, wondering if a loose sheet tray had shifted. I held my breath and listened. The scraping noise stopped just as suddenly as it started. I convinced myself it was nothing, maybe a rat or the building settling, but the unease stayed with me. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the basement stairs. The narrow steps creaked underfoot, and the air grew colder as I descended. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing rows of shelves stocked with canned goods and boxes. I checked the refrigerator, closed tight. No signs of movement anywhere. Still, the silence felt heavy, almost unnatural. As I turned to head back upstairs, I thought I heard a faint tapping sound, like fingernails lightly drumming on a metal surface. My heart skipped a beat. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the gloom. Nothing. I laughed nervously and shook my head. Get a grip, I told myself. Back in the kitchen, I tried to brush off the feeling. But every time I glanced at the basement door, a chill ran down my spine. Over the next few nights, the noises grew louder, scratching, tapping, and sometimes soft footsteps, as if someone, or something, was pacing just out of sight. I started leaving the basement light on whenever I was down there, hoping to keep whatever it was at bay. One night, as I closed up, I heard the scraping again, louder this time, like claws scraping across concrete. I hesitated, flashlight trembling in my hand. I called out, "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, a low, almost guttural whisper, so faint I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. I bolted upstairs and locked the basement door behind me. I don't know what's down there, but I'm certain it's not alone. Sometimes, when the restaurant is empty and the night is dead quiet, I swear I hear breathing coming from below. And I'm not the only one who's noticed. A couple of co-workers have told me they've felt watched when they're alone. One even said she saw something move in the corner of the basement once, but when she turned the light on, nothing was there. I'm trying to stay calm, but every time I hear that scratching now, it feels like it's right outside the door. And I'm starting to wonder, what if it's not just noises? What if it's waiting for me? Even when I was sure the place was empty. One night, I stayed late after closing, determined to prove to myself it was nothing. I sat in the dining area, listening. The silence stretched thick around me. Then, out of nowhere, the scratching started again, slow, deliberate, like nails dragging across the tiles. I froze, my heart hammering. It seemed to be coming from deeper in the basement, past the fridge and the shelves where the old equipment was stacked. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly crept toward the stairs. The beam bounced over boxes and crates, but nothing moved. I flicked the basement light on and off, trying to catch any movement. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard it, a soft, breathy whisper, almost too quiet to catch. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It sent a cold wave through me. Suddenly, the basement light flickered violently and went out, plunging me into darkness. The scratching noise stopped instantly. I stood frozen, flashlight shaking in my hand, every instinct screaming at me to run. I bolted up the stairs and slammed the door behind me, locking it tight. Since that night, the basement feels different. It's like something is watching, waiting for me when I'm alone. The scratching hasn't stopped, sometimes louder, sometimes faint, but it always comes when no one else is around. I'm not sure what it is or why it's there, but I don't think it's just the building settling or rats. And honestly, I'm starting to dread every shift more than ever. That night, I barely slept. Every creak and groan in the restaurant echoed in my mind. The basement wasn't just a storage room anymore, it felt alive, like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to come back. The following days were worse. The scratching noises started earlier, sometimes during the afternoon when a few customers were still around. But whenever I looked toward the basement door, it was like the noise vanished, swallowed by the silence. The inconsistency made me question my own senses. Was I really hearing it, or just imagining things? One evening, after the dinner rush, I was locking up when I heard a distinct tapping on the basement door. It was slow, deliberate. Not a knock from a person, but a scratching, like someone dragging their fingers along the wood. I froze, the keys slipping from my sweaty hands onto the floor. The tapping stopped. Silence. I tried calling out, "Hello," but no answer. I leaned closer to the door, my ear nearly touching the cold wood. Then, from the other side, came a faint, whispery breath. I stepped back, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. The hair on my arms stood on end. I grabbed a metal chair nearby and jammed it under the door handle, locking the door from my side. I didn't want to be down there alone anymore. The next morning, I told the manager everything, the noises, the tapping, the whispers. He just smiled tiredly and said, "Old buildings make noises. You're just stressed." But his eyes flickered with something else. Concern. Or maybe resignation. I knew he was hiding something. That night, I stayed after closing again, determined to get answers. I sat outside the basement door, flashlight in hand, recording on my phone, hoping to catch something. Hours passed. Then the scratching started again, slow, precise, coming from behind the door. Suddenly, the door handle rattled violently, like something was trying to force it open. My breath caught. I backed away, trembling, as the chair holding the door locked began to scrape against the floor. Then, silence. The door stayed shut. I don't know what's in that basement. But I'm not sure I want to find out. The whole restaurant seemed to change. The silence was thicker, heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I found myself constantly glancing at the basement door, half expecting to see something lurking just beyond it. One night, as I was wiping down tables near closing time, the scratching began again. It was sharper this time, more insistent, almost like it was trying to get my attention. My hands froze on the rag, and my heart hammered in my chest. I swallowed hard and told myself to just ignore it, but the sound only grew louder. I decided to do something different that night. I grabbed my phone again, this time not just to record the noise but to live stream it to a friend I trusted. Maybe if someone else heard it live, it wouldn't feel so real, or maybe they'd be able to explain it. My hands trembled as I set up the camera pointing at the basement door and whispered, "If I don't make it, you'll know what happened." The scratching started again, slow and rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Then suddenly, a cold draft swept across the room. My flashlight flickered and died. The live feed went dark for a few seconds before cutting out completely. I stood there, frozen. The basement door creaked open slowly by itself. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs wouldn't move. And then, a faint whisper, so low I barely heard it, "Don't leave." That was the last straw. I quit the next day, leaving my last paycheck and the memories behind. But even now, whenever I'm alone in a quiet place, I can't shake the feeling that something's still scratching, waiting for me in the dark. But the moment I flip that switch off, it starts again, like clockwork. It's as if whatever's down there is waiting for darkness to feel safe enough to make itself known. I don't know what it is, and honestly, I'm too afraid to find out. Sometimes I wonder if it's just my imagination, or maybe the stress is messing with me. But the cold air, the way the light flickers, and that scratching, it feels too real to ignore. Some nights I lie awake, thinking about that basement, trying to convince myself it's nothing. But the truth is, I dread closing time more than anything now. The restaurant may be quiet, but I'm never really alone. And I'm pretty sure whatever's down there is still watching. Some nights, after I finally lock the door and step outside, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me. I'll glance back at the restaurant, its windows glowing faintly in the dark, and swear I see a shadow move just beyond the glass. I try to tell myself it's just a trick of the light or a passing car, but deep down, I know it's not. One evening, about 2 weeks after the scratching started getting worse, I stayed late to finish some paperwork. The place was dead quiet, and I had the basement light on all the way through. Around midnight, I heard a different noise, a soft tapping coming from the ceiling above the kitchen. It was steady, slow, like fingernails drumming on wood. I froze, heart racing. The tapping stopped when I moved toward the stairs, but it started again the moment I stepped away. I grabbed the broom, half expecting to find a raccoon or bird trapped in the vents. But there was nothing, just silence and the faint hum of the refrigerators. After that night, things only got worse. The scratching grew louder and more frantic, and the tapping upstairs became a regular occurrence. I started noticing cold spots around the kitchen, places where the air felt unnaturally chilled. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting just beyond my line of sight. I mentioned it to a co-worker once, but he laughed it off, saying the place was probably just old and creaky. But I wasn't so sure. I began to dread every shift, knowing that when the lights went out, whatever was lurking would make itself known. One night, desperate and scared, I left the basement light on, the kitchen lights blazing, and sat on the floor, phone flashlight ready. I wanted to catch it on camera, to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. Hours passed. The restaurant grew colder. The noises came, scratching, tapping, and then something new, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to echo from beneath the floorboards. I tried to call out, to tell whoever or whatever it was to stop. But the only response was silence. Then a sudden crash from the basement, something heavy falling, and the lights flickered violently before plunging me into complete darkness. I didn't stay to find out what happened next. I ran out of there, heart pounding, breath ragged, and didn't look back until the sun rose. Whatever is down there is still waiting, and I'm not sure how much longer I can keep facing it every night. Convince myself it was something mundane, but the truth was I wasn't so sure anymore. That night, the scratching got louder, more urgent, and it felt like it was moving around, not just one spot but all over the attic floor above me. Sleep was impossible. I kept glancing up at the ceiling, imagining shadows crawling under the tiles or something worse waiting behind the walls. The next morning, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed the crowbar and went to the attic door. My hands trembled as I slipped it under the edge and started prying. The door creaked and groaned, protesting after years of being stuck. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. I froze, holding my breath. Then a faint whisper, like a breathy hiss, escaped from the crack I'd made. My heart hammered in my chest, but I pushed harder. With one final effort, the door swung open a crack. Inside was darkness, thick and cold. The smell was stale, like dust and something else I couldn't place. I flicked on my phone's flashlight and peered in. The attic was empty, except for a pile of old boxes in the corner. But as I stepped inside, the temperature dropped even more, and that scratching sound started again, coming from behind the boxes. I moved the boxes aside, revealing a narrow hole in the floorboards, just wide enough for something to crawl through. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with just rodents. Whatever it was living in the walls and floors, and it had been watching me this whole time. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm starting to think this place isn't as empty as it seems. And the scratching, it's far from over. I wanted to back out, slam the door shut, and pretend none of it was real. But something rooted me to the spot, a mix of fear, curiosity, and that stubborn refusal to be chased out of my own home by an unknown noise. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and crawled closer to the hole. It was dark inside, but I could see scratch marks around the edges, like claws had dug at the wood for years. I shone the light in, but the hole seemed to lead into blackness, maybe a crawl space or some hidden gap between the floors. Suddenly, the scratching stopped again. The silence pressed in so hard it was almost suffocating. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I caught a faint movement, a shadow flickering deep inside the hole. My breath hitched. "Hello?" I whispered, unsure if I was talking to an animal, a person, or something else entirely. No response. Just the cold silence. I stepped back and shut the attic door, locking it carefully. My mind raced, trying to come up with any logical explanation, but the unease settled deep in my bones. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind outside felt like it was connected to that hole, to whatever was hiding just beyond my reach. I started searching online for similar stories, people hearing noises in their attics, strange scratching sounds with no explanation. A few mentioned the possibility of spirits or entities, but I wanted proof before letting my imagination run wild. Over the next few days, I tried setting traps near the hole, thinking maybe it was some kind of animal I could catch. Nothing. Then, one evening, I heard it again, louder this time, right above me as I sat on the couch. The scratching wasn't random anymore. It had a rhythm, almost like it was tapping out a pattern. I grabbed my phone to record, hoping for evidence, but as soon as I switched on the light, the sound stopped. Just like before. Now, I'm left with this awful feeling that I'm being watched, that the scratching is a warning, or maybe a message. I don't know how long I can keep living with this, or what will happen if I try to investigate further. But one thing's for sure, whatever's up there isn't done making its presence known. Softly at first, then louder as darkness settled in again. I climbed into bed uneasy, my ears straining to catch every sound. The camcorder's red light blinked steadily, a small comfort in the silence. Hours passed. Then around 2 a.m., the scratching started again, this time right beneath the camera's view. My heart jumped. I grabbed my phone, watching the live feed with trembling hands. The scratching was steady, deliberate, and I could swear it was moving closer. Suddenly, the camera caught a quick flash of something dark, darting just out of the beam's edge. I rewound the footage and saw a shadow slipping behind the boxes, too fast to identify but definitely there. Adrenaline flooded me. Whatever this was, it was real. The next day, I reviewed the video on my computer, zooming in frame by frame. There were faint, claw-like scratches on the floorboards, and at one point, a pair of small glowing eyes reflected the flashlight beam for just a split second. I debated what to do next. Call an exterminator. Bring in an animal control expert. Or maybe I was dealing with something else entirely. The scratching continued nightly, sometimes stopping when the attic light flickered on, other times seeming to mock me from the shadows. I'm still not sure what's in that attic, but now I have proof it's not just my imagination. And every night, before I close the attic door, I whisper a silent warning, "Stay away, whatever you are." Because I don't want to find out what happens if I don't. That night, I couldn't sleep. The video haunted me, those glowing eyes burned into my mind. I kept wondering if it was an animal, or something worse. I decided I needed to learn more about the house's history, hoping some clue might explain the strange noises and the attic's secrets. I spent the next day at the local library digging through old records. The townhouse was built in the early 1900s and had changed owners several times. Most records were uneventful until I found a brief mention of a previous tenant who reported hearing scratching noises above their bedroom, exactly where my attic was now. The notes said they moved out abruptly, citing unexplainable disturbances, but didn't go into detail. I also found an old newspaper clipping about a small fire that had damaged part of the attic decades ago. According to the article, the fire was mysterious, no cause ever identified, and the attic was sealed off for repairs that never fully happened. Could the fire have trapped something inside, or disturbed something lurking up there? That night, I set up the camcorder again, but this time added an extra battery-powered light aimed at the darkest corner. I stayed downstairs, trying to ignore every creak and groan, but the scratching started again, louder and more frantic. I wanted to believe it was just an animal trapped or scared, but my gut told me this was something different. Then, without warning, a heavy thud came from above, like something large falling or slamming into the floor. The light flickered and went out. I froze. Minutes later, I heard slow footsteps descending the attic stairs. But when I looked up, the staircase was empty. Since then, I've been too scared to stay in the house alone at night. The scratching hasn't stopped, it's like a countdown to whatever is still up there, waiting. I don't know how much longer I can keep living with this. But one thing's certain, whatever's in the attic isn't ready to leave. And I'm starting to think it doesn't want me to either. After that night, I barely slept. Every creak, every whisper of wind outside made me jump. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, the move, the old house settling, but deep down, I knew something was very wrong. I started researching paranormal activity in old homes, trying to find a rational explanation. I came across stories of restless spirits trapped after tragedies, or animals nesting in forgotten places. But none of that comforted me. One evening, I decided I couldn't live in fear anymore. I reached out to a local historian who specialized in the neighborhood. Maybe they could shed light on the attic's past. The historian told me the townhouse once belonged to a man named Elias Crowley, a reclusive carpenter who vanished without a trace nearly a century ago. Rumor had it, he was obsessed with a secret workshop hidden in the attic, where he crafted strange objects no one ever saw. Some neighbors claimed to hear odd noises late at night, but no one dared investigate. That night, armed with this new information and my flashlight, I climbed the attic stairs again. I shined my light into the far corner, searching for the workshop or any clue of what Crowley might have left behind. As I stepped closer, the scratching began again, but this time, it wasn't random. It seemed to form a pattern, almost like Morse code. I froze, heart pounding. Then, a cold breeze swept past me, carrying a faint whisper I couldn't quite make out. My skin prickled. I had the overwhelming sense I wasn't alone. Suddenly, something brushed past my arm, something cold, intangible, yet terrifyingly real. I stumbled back, nearly falling down the stairs. I realized then, whatever was in the attic wasn't just a trapped animal or a restless spirit. It was something else entirely. And it wasn't done with me yet. The air in the bathroom grew thick, heavy, like the room was holding its breath with me. My heart pounded so hard I was sure the reflection could hear it. For a moment, I felt like I was staring into something alive, something watching, waiting. Then, just as suddenly as it had happened, the reflection snapped back to mimicry, perfectly synchronized again, as if nothing was wrong. But I knew better. I felt it. I swallowed hard, the knot in my stomach tightening. Whatever was in that mirror wasn't just a trick of light or shadow. It was something else entirely, and it had chosen me. I backed out of the bathroom, my hands clammy and trembling. I knew I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't happening. This thing was real, and it wasn't just confined to the attic anymore. It was following me, lurking in the edges of my everyday life, waiting for the moment it could cross over. That night, I barely slept, haunted by the image of that delayed reflection staring back at me, just a heartbeat behind, but somehow, always a step ahead. I tried to distract myself the next day, telling myself it was just stress, the old house messing with my mind. But deep down, I knew the attic and the mirror were connected somehow. The scratching upstairs, the shadowy shape caught on the camcorder, and now this lagging reflection, it all felt like pieces of the same dark puzzle. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself once again standing in front of the bathroom mirror. The air was cooler now, the faint smell of musty wood lingering like a ghost from the attic. My fingers trembled as I reached out slowly, almost hesitant, to touch the glass. The reflection hesitated, just like before, but this time, instead of copying me perfectly a moment later, it smiled. Not a friendly smile, but a slow, crooked grin that didn't belong to me. I jerked my hand back, my pulse skyrocketing. The mirror went dark for a split second, then my reflection was gone entirely, replaced by a swirling shadow that seemed to pulse and writhe behind the glass. I stumbled back, nearly hitting the sink. My breath caught, my eyes locked on the mirror, and the shadow reached out, just a faint blur, like smoke twisting toward me. Then it vanished. The bathroom light flickered on its own, and I was left alone, staring at an ordinary mirror that suddenly felt like a window into something I wasn't meant to see. I knew then I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever was in the attic, whatever haunted that mirror, it was trying to make contact. And I was the only one standing in its way. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps, every shadow seemed to shift just beyond the corner of my vision. I kept replaying the mirror's smile, that unnatural grin, over and over. What did it want from me? Why me? The next day, I decided to do some research. I dug through old town records and online forums about the house. The previous owner had disappeared mysteriously decades ago, no note, no clues, just vanished. Neighbors whispered about strange noises, flickering lights, and odd reflections seen in windows and mirrors late at night. One story caught my eye, a local legend about a restless spirit trapped between worlds, bound to mirrors and hidden spaces like attics, desperate to be freed, or worse, desperate to trap someone else. I felt a chill as I read. It all made sense now, the attic scratching, the shadowy figure, the lagging reflection. The house wasn't just old, it was a prison. Determined to face this head-on, I gathered some salt, a few candles, and an old book of prayers and rituals I found at a thrift store. That evening, I prepared the attic. I sprinkled salt along the doorway, lit the candles, and sat with the book open on my lap. As darkness swallowed the room, the scratching started again. Louder this time. More urgent. I whispered the prayers, my voice shaking. The air grew heavy, thick with cold, and then the attic door slammed shut on its own. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed from above. The shadow moved faster, darker, twisting in ways no living thing could. I stood my ground, repeating the prayers louder. For a moment, everything stopped. The house went silent, the air still. Then, with a final shudder, the door creaked open. The attic was empty. I collapsed, exhausted but relieved. For now. Because I knew this wasn't over. The house had secrets still buried deep, and whatever haunted it wasn't finished with me yet. The days after the attic ritual were tense but strangely quiet. No scratching, no shadows darting in the corners of my eyes, and the mirror behaved, or at least, it seemed to. I cautiously used the bathroom again, watching my reflection carefully, waiting for any sign of that unnatural lag or eerie smile. Nothing. It felt like a reprieve, a calm after the storm. But deep down, I knew better than to trust it. One night, around midnight, I woke to a cold draft brushing my face. The house was still, but the faint sound of scraping began again, this time from the basement. My stomach dropped. I hadn't checked the basement since moving in. The door was old and creaky, and the light barely worked. My flashlight flickered as I descended the stairs, each step heavier than the last. At the bottom, the air was damp and smelled faintly of mildew. I shone the flashlight around, landing on a small door I hadn't noticed before, almost hidden behind an old workbench. The scraping was coming from behind that door. Hands trembling, I reached out and turned the rusty knob. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow passageway, descending even further into darkness. A cold wave hit me, like a breath from another world. I shined my light down the passage, and at the far end, I saw a flicker, something moving, just out of reach. It was watching me. I swallowed hard, knowing that whatever was in this house, it wasn't confined to the attic or the mirror anymore. It had found a way to spread its reach, deeper into the bones of this place. I stepped back, heart racing. The house was alive with things I didn't understand, things that wanted me to leave, or maybe wanted something else entirely. And I still hadn't decided what I was going to do. I slammed the basement door shut and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. My mind was racing with every possible explanation, none of them comforting. What was down there? A raccoon? A stray animal? Or something far worse? Sleep was impossible that night. Every creak and whisper of the old house set my nerves on edge. I kept imagining shadows slipping just beyond the reach of my flashlight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The next morning, I debated calling someone, animal control, a pest expert, even a paranormal investigator, but something held me back. I felt trapped in my own home, a place that was supposed to be my sanctuary, now a cage. Days passed with no new noises from the basement, but the mirror continued its unsettling behavior. The lagging reflection, the occasional blink that didn't sync up with mine, it was as if the glass was a window into another dimension, one where something was trying to break through. One evening, I noticed faint writing on the bathroom mirror, scrawled in what looked like condensation, but I was the only one home. The words were almost illegible, but I made out, "Leave now." Panic surged through me. Was this some trick of the moisture? A hallucination born of stress? Or a message from whatever had made this house its home? I wiped the mirror clean, heart pounding. Whatever was here wasn't just scratching or lurking, it was trying to communicate. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to confront whatever haunted this house, or risk losing myself to it completely. That night, I gathered everything I thought I might need: a flashlight, the crowbar, my phone fully charged, and a small pocket knife. I told myself I was ready, that I wasn't going to run or hide anymore. This was my home, and I was going to find out what was behind those walls and inside that mirror. I started with the attic. The door still creaked ominously as I pushed it open, the stale air hitting me like a wall. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the empty boards and shadows. But I could feel it, something was watching me. As I moved deeper inside, the scratching began again, soft at first, then louder, as if it was coming from behind the far wall. I pressed my ear against the wooden panel, heart pounding. The sound was deliberate, scraping, clawing, desperate. I grabbed the crowbar and pried at the wall near the eaves. The wood groaned and splintered. Behind it, I found a narrow crawl space, just wide enough to squeeze into. Crawling inside, the space was cramped, dust thick in the air. And then I saw it, a small, worn box covered in strange symbols, almost like a warning. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were old photographs, yellowed letters, and a small cracked mirror, one that looked eerily similar to the one in my bathroom. That's when I heard a breath behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam catching two glowing eyes staring back. The attic was no longer empty. Whatever had been scratching, hiding, watching, it was real. And it wasn't going anywhere. I froze, every muscle locked in place. Those eyes didn't blink, they simply stared, unblinking and unyielding. The air grew colder, like the warmth had been sucked out of the room. My breath came out in ragged gasps as I tried to focus through the dim light. Slowly, the shape stepped into the flashlight's beam, a hunched figure, gaunt and covered in dirt and grime, with elongated fingers that scraped the edges of the broken box. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over its bones. But it wasn't its appearance that terrified me the most, it was the way it moved, jerky and unnatural, like a marionette with tangled strings. I swallowed hard, trying to force my voice out. What are you? It didn't answer. Instead, it reached out with one claw-like hand and tapped the cracked mirror inside the box. The glass shimmered strangely, almost as if it was alive. I took a shaky step back, tripping over debris and landing hard on the dusty floor. The creature hissed softly, a sound like nails on a chalkboard, and retreated just enough to vanish into the shadows of the crawl space. My heart thundered in my chest. I scrambled out, slamming the attic door behind me and locking it with trembling hands. The box, the mirror, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I was just beginning to uncover. I realized then that this presence wasn't just haunting my attic or my reflection, it was bound to this house, to that mirror, to something much older and darker than I could have imagined. And it wanted me to find out. Voice cracked, but no answer came, just the persistent tapping following each step, like a sinister echo beneath the floorboards. I wanted to believe it was my mind playing tricks, the old house settling, or maybe some small animal trapped below. But the perfect timing, the way it matched every move of mine exactly, that felt wrong, unnatural. The next morning, bleary-eyed and exhausted, I searched online for anything similar: ghost stories, poltergeist activity, supernatural folklore tied to floorboards. I found tales of spirits trapped beneath houses, mimicking the living, trying to communicate, or torment. I considered calling a professional, a paranormal investigator, but I was terrified of what they might find, or if they'd believe me at all. So I kept avoiding the hallway after dark, walking the long way around the house when possible. But the tapping never stopped completely. Sometimes, when I sat still in the living room at night, I swear I could hear faint, soft knocking rhythms under the floor. It felt like whatever was down there was watching me, waiting for me to move, for me to step, to acknowledge its presence. And I couldn't help but wonder, what happens when it stops mimicking my steps? What will it do then? The days blurred into nights, and the tapping continued like a haunting soundtrack to my life. I stopped trying to rationalize it. The logical explanations weren't enough anymore. Whatever was under my floorboards wasn't a rat or a loose board. It was something else, something that knew me, that mirrored me. One evening, I found myself pacing nervously in the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the faint creaks of old wood settling. I glanced down the hallway where the tapping usually started. My heart hammered as if warning me to stay away. But that night, curiosity pushed me forward. I stepped cautiously into the hallway, my phone flashlight in hand, ready to record again. The tapping began immediately, matching my steps perfectly, slow, deliberate, almost mocking. Then I stopped. No movement. Silence. A cold chill swept through me, and the tapping stopped too. I stood frozen, every muscle tense. Then, just as I started to relax, I felt a faint brush against my ankle, soft, like a finger tracing the outside of my shoe. I jumped back, nearly dropping my phone. The light flickered. And from the darkness beneath the floor, I swear I heard a breath, slow, shallow, and deliberate. I didn't wait for more. I ran back to my room, slammed the door, and locked it. That night, I barely slept. The house felt alive with a presence I couldn't see but could feel creeping closer. I knew I had to decide soon, face whatever was under my floorboards, or find a way out, before it found a way in. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak, every sigh of the old house sounded like footsteps creeping closer. I kept my phone by my side, ready to record the next strange sound or movement. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again, a faint tap, followed by that unmistakable brushing sensation along my foot. This time, I forced myself out of bed and crept to the door. I unlocked it slowly and peeked out. The hallway was empty, bathed in the pale glow of my phone's flashlight. The tapping resumed immediately as I took my first step out. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give me away. Step by step, the taps echoed in perfect rhythm, just like before. I reached the middle of the hallway, stopped, and crouched down, shining the light at the floorboards. For a moment, the tapping stopped. Then, from the shadow beneath the boards, I saw something, a quick flicker of movement. Something small and dark, just out of clear sight. I reached out my hand, trembling, and pressed my palm flat against the floor. The tapping started again, but this time it wasn't in sync with my movements. It was faster, irregular, like a desperate signal. Then a whisper, so faint I could barely hear it, a soft, breathy voice barely more than a hiss. Help! My blood ran cold. I scrambled back to my room, locked the door, and sat shaking against it, heart racing. What was trapped under my floorboards? Was it alive? And more importantly, was it trying to communicate, or warn me? The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me like a heavy fog. I barely ate, my appetite gone, replaced by a gnawing anxiety that seemed to grow with every passing hour. The voice haunted my thoughts, that whispered plea for help. Was it real, or was my mind playing tricks on me? Determined to find answers, I grabbed my phone and prepared to explore the crawl space again, this time with a flashlight, voice recorder, and even a small crowbar. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I knew I couldn't ignore whatever was beneath the floor. The moment I removed the panel, a stale, damp smell hit me. The crawl space was cramped and suffocating, filled with cobwebs and dust. I swept the flashlight beam around, searching for any sign of life. Then, near one corner, I noticed something strange, faint scratches etched into the dirt floor. They looked deliberate, like someone had been clawing or scraping there recently. My heart jumped. Could someone, or something, have been trapped down here? I pressed record and called out softly, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. I waited, every nerve on edge. Then, the faintest sound, a scraping noise, like nails on wood, coming from the far end of the crawl space. I swallowed hard and edged closer, the beam of my flashlight trembling. The scratches grew deeper as I moved forward, and the air felt colder. Suddenly, a sharp tapping on the wood above startled me, like something was moving just out of reach. I jumped back and slammed the panel shut, my hands shaking violently. I knew I had to call someone, a professional, but the thought of inviting strangers into this old house filled me with an eerie dread. Was I going crazy, or was this house hiding a secret darker than I could imagine? That night, sleep was out of the question. I sat in my living room with every light on, the house eerily silent except for the occasional creak of the old wood settling. I kept my phone close, ready to record anything strange, but the silence gnawed at me worse than any noise. Around 2 a.m., I finally heard it again, the faint tapping beneath the floorboards. This time, it was accompanied by a low, almost mournful whisper, so soft I barely caught the words. "Help me." My blood ran cold. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way down the hallway, every step echoed by a matching tap from beneath me. The whisper came again, more urgent this time. "Please." I reached the spot where the tapping was strongest, the floor seemed to pulse beneath my feet. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear against the wood. The whispering grew louder, more desperate. I scrambled back, heart hammering in my chest. Something was definitely down there, trapped or calling out from the shadows beneath my home. I knew I couldn't face this alone anymore. Tomorrow, I'd find someone who dealt with the unknown. Because whatever was in this house wasn't just old wood creaking anymore. It was something else. Something alive. And it needed help. The next morning, I spent hours searching online for anyone who might help, paranormal investigators, psychics, even local historians. Most of it sounded like nonsense to me, but I was desperate. Finally, I found a small group that specialized in restless spirits and strange activity in old houses. They agreed to come out that evening. All day, the house felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from just beneath the floorboards. Every time I stepped in the hallway, I could almost hear faint scratching and tapping waiting for me. When the team arrived, they carried equipment I barely understood, EMF meters, thermal cameras, digital recorders. They set up in the living room and the hallway, asking me to describe everything I'd experienced. As night fell, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder, and shadows stretched longer in the corners of the rooms. The lead investigator motioned for me to follow him down to the crawl space access panel. I hesitated but knew I had to face this head-on. We opened the panel together. The stale, damp air wafted up as I shined my flashlight into the dark space. The investigator's voice was calm but serious. "Sometimes, spirits get trapped in tight places like this," he said. "We're going to try to communicate." They began setting up their devices, and I stood back, heart racing. The tapping started again, rhythmic, insistent, like a heartbeat beneath the floor. Then, out of the silence, came a voice clear as day. "Help me, trapped." I gasped. The team exchanged looks. This was no ordinary haunted house. There was something real and desperate down there, something that needed to be freed. As the session continued, I realized this was only the beginning. Whatever was beneath my floorboards was reaching out, and now I had to find a way to bring it peace, or risk it breaking through the fragile barrier keeping it contained. The voice echoed through the silence, but I heard nothing in response. My chest tightened, and my breathing grew rough. I looked out the window toward the backyard. It was pitch black outside. An urge to run away, to just drive off, surged through me. But I couldn't bring myself to leave my own house in the middle of the night. Instead, I stood there, breathing slowly until my pulse steadied. Then, I walked back to my bedroom. The tapping followed me. Once I shut the door, silence returned. I locked it, even though I knew that wouldn't protect me from whatever lurked beneath the floor. I sat on my bed, back against the headboard, my mind racing with images of someone crawling under the floor. I checked the crawl space again. Moving around there wasn't easy, and it was sealed from the outside. No signs of forced entry. I thought about calling a friend or family member just to say I was freaked out, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. I stayed in bed, exhausted but too wired to rest. Eventually, around 3 a.m., I dozed off. I woke late, dread flooding back as memories of the night before returned. I spent the afternoon searching online for clues, wood floor tapping in sync with footsteps. Most results blamed normal house settling or plumbing issues, but this wasn't normal creaking or pipes. I called a local handyman who arrived around 5 p.m. I told him about the strange noises in my flooring, maybe an animal. He inspected the crawl space and the exterior, but found no signs of infestation. He tapped the boards from below, and I stood in the hallway listening. It wasn't the same sound. After half an hour, he said everything looked structurally fine. I thanked him, paid him, and watched him drive away, feeling more alone than ever. That night, I sat in the living room with all the lights on. The TV was muted. My phone was in my hand, ready to record again. I waited until midnight, trying to gather courage. My pulse raced, chest tight, shoulders tense. I got up and walked to the hallway entrance. I stood staring at the floor, shining my phone's flashlight along the corridor. It looked normal, just old wood, the faint outline of the door at the far end. I lifted my foot and took a step. The tapping came immediately, light knocks from beneath me. My breath caught. Another step, another tap. My heart thumped, my stomach twisted in knots. I couldn't believe this was happening again. I called out, "Whoever is there, leave me alone." Only my own breathing and the hum of the fridge responded. I walked a few more paces. The tapping didn't stop. Adrenaline surged through me, my legs felt weak, arms tingled, grip on the phone tightened. I forced myself to keep moving. The corridor seemed longer than usual. Each step had a matching tap. My throat was so dry I could barely swallow. When I reached the bedroom door, I opened it quickly and stepped inside. The tapping stopped. Sweat coated my skin, my breathing was harsh. Confusion and fear swirled in my mind. I slammed the door, locked it, and leaned against it. Outside, the house was silent. I ended the recording and flopped onto my bed, trembling. Listening to the playback, the taps were clear and perfectly lined up with my steps. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The stress was too much. I started packing a bag to stay at a motel. Clothes thrown hastily into a duffel, hands shaking as I zipped it up. I grabbed my car keys from the nightstand and opened my bedroom door. The corridor was dark, I didn't turn the lights on. I thought, maybe if I didn't walk slowly, if I just dashed out, it wouldn't happen. I sprinted. A rapid series of taps echoed beneath my feet, matching the heavy thuds of my footsteps. My heart hammered. I didn't stop. I made it to the front door, flung it open, and rushed outside. My car sat in the gravel driveway. I jumped in, locked the doors, started the engine, and drove off, leaving the house lights on. I got a room at a small motel on the edge of town, where I'm sitting now, typing this on my laptop. My plan is to return during the day, gather the rest of my things, and sell the place as fast as I can. I don't care if I lose money. I can't handle those nightly taps. I can't handle the feeling of fingers slipping through the gaps in the wood. I know I won't sleep well tonight. I still feel that sensation on my feet, still hear those taps in my head. I can't explain it, and I don't want to stay there long enough to find out. Maybe someone else can figure it out someday. I just need to be far away from that corridor at night. I'm done. Sweat rolled down my face before I even saw the footprints. The afternoon sun was low, and the trail was quiet except for my own boots scraping loose gravel. I took a left turn where the brush thickened, expecting nothing unusual. Then I saw the muddy patch ahead, and those giant tracks. They looked like footprints, but far larger than anything human. My stomach tightened. I stopped moving and glanced around, listening for any sign of life. Nothing. Just the breeze stirring leaves. My pulse thundered in my ears. I stepped closer. My boots sank a bit into the mud. The footprints were deep, the stride long. I bent down, placing my hand next to one. My entire hand fit inside the outline, with space to spare. The shape was broad with 5 distinct toes, but thick, almost stubby. The edges were smeared, probably from water or shifting mud. I touched the shallow water pooled in one print. It felt cold, almost icy. My throat tightened. That strange tingling crept up my scalp. I should keep moving. I stood and scanned the area. Thick trunks blocked most of the sunlight. I barely saw the sky through the canopy. No birds, no animals, just silence. My brain raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a trick of the mud. Maybe a bear had passed through. But these prints didn't look like a bear's. They looked like bare feet, just impossibly large. I stepped back and kicked some loose dirt over the tracks, pointless, like trying to hide something from myself. I decided to keep going and finish my hike. I'd keep my eyes open and head back before dark. The air smelled damp, like rain-soaked leaves. As I walked, I heard a faint crunch of branches behind me. I stopped and turned. Nothing. My heart pounded. I looked down, only my own footprints marked the ground. I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. The hair on my arms stood up. I scanned left and right, trying to find a shadow, a movement. I pushed on, tension growing. My boots sank in soft earth, leaving prints behind. I passed a small creek, stepping over stones. Then I heard a louder snap behind me, a thick branch breaking. It sounded close. I spun around, shining my flashlight even though it was still light. I caught a glimpse of bushes moving. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. The bushes rustled again, but still no clear shape emerged. The dense foliage made it hard to see more than a few yards. I strained my eyes, trying to catch any sign of movement, but the woods held their secrets tight. Another snap cracked through the air, this time closer, heavier. Something was definitely following me. I swallowed hard, tension coiling in my stomach. I debated calling out, but the silence felt safer than giving away my position. Instead, I gripped my flashlight tighter and started moving faster, pushing through the underbrush. Every step stirred the thick leaves and snapped twigs beneath my boots, but the footsteps behind me kept pace, deliberate and steady. Panic surged through me. I broke into a run. Branches whipped my face, thorns scraped my arms. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pushed forward blindly. The forest seemed endless. But I had to get out. Suddenly, the footsteps behind me accelerated, pounding on the soft earth with unnatural force. I dared a glance back. Nothing but shadows and trees. But the sounds, heavy, powerful, were unmistakable. I ran harder, heart racing, muscles burning. Then the trail opened up, a small clearing bathed in the dimming twilight. I burst into it and skidded to a halt. The footprints led straight into the clearing, and stopped. No sign of the creature that made them. Only silence. My chest heaved as I scanned the tree line, heart pounding in my ears. Then I saw it, a dark figure, barely visible, watching me from the edge of the woods. Its eyes glinted in the fading light. I couldn't move. Frozen with fear, I locked eyes with it. And then, as if deciding I was no threat, it melted back into the trees. The pounding in my chest slowed, but the terror lingered. I didn't wait around to see if it returned. I sprinted back toward my car, every sense screaming to escape. When I finally reached the gravel driveway, the safety of my vehicle never felt so good. I locked the doors and sat for a moment, trying to calm down. But the memory of those massive footprints, and the shadow watching me, would haunt me long after the woods were behind me. Softly, swirling around me like a cold wind trapped underground. I took a step back, gripping my baton tighter, every instinct screaming to leave. Then the temperature plunged suddenly, my breath visible in front of me like fog on a freezing morning. The voices grew louder, more urgent, but still indecipherable, like a language just out of reach. I flicked my flashlight wildly, searching the dense mist, but the beam was swallowed by the fog. For a moment, I thought I saw a shape flicker on the edge of my vision, a shadow slipping behind a pillar, or maybe just my mind playing tricks. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move forward again, my footsteps echoing against the cold concrete walls. The whispers shifted, almost like a warning now, a low chant that pressed against my ears and rattled my nerves. My skin crawled, every hair stood on end. I reached out to touch the fog, it was cold, clammy, almost alive. I jerked my hand back as if burned. A sudden clang echoed somewhere deeper in the tunnel. My heart leapt. I spun around, shining the flashlight down the corridor behind me, empty. but the sound had come from somewhere down there. I debated calling for backup, but I was alone on this shift and the radio was dead silent. Then, out of the fog, a faint outline began to form, a figure, tall and thin, almost translucent, with hollow eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the flashlight beam. I froze. It stepped forward slowly, and with it came a rush of cold air that felt like it seeped into my bones. My throat tightened. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to move. The figure opened its mouth, but no words came out, just a hollow, echoing silence. I raised the baton, ready to defend myself, when suddenly the fog vanished as quickly as it had come, and the figure disappeared. The tunnel was quiet again, the only sound my ragged breathing. I didn't wait a second longer. I sprinted back up the stairs, not daring to look back until I burst into the fresh night air. Outside, the city lights burned bright and safe. But in the back of my mind, the image of those glowing eyes haunted me. I never told anyone about that night. No one would believe me anyway. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I swear I still hear those whispers, calling me back to that tunnel, to whatever waits in the fog. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind raced with what I'd recorded and the chilling realization that something unseen lingered beneath the city. Every creak of my apartment, every shadow flickering past the window, felt like a reminder that the tunnel's whispers hadn't left me alone. Days passed, and work became a blur. I found myself avoiding the subway entirely, but the pull kept growing stronger. I kept replaying the recording, trying to decipher the strange language, searching online for anything similar. Nothing quite matched. It was like a lost dialect, or a code meant only for those who knew the tunnel's secrets. Then came the dreams. Vivid, unsettling visions of wandering endless underground passages, the fog curling around me like fingers, and soft voices beckoning from the darkness. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. One evening, after work, I met up with an old friend who was into local legends and urban exploration. I played him the recording, hoping for some insight. He listened carefully, his face growing pale. This sounds like old Slavic chants. Maybe a ritual. People talk about protective spells or binding ceremonies performed underground to keep something trapped. His words sent a chill deeper than the coldest night in the tunnel. Trapped. What could be down there? I don't know, he said. But sometimes places like that aren't just abandoned because of safety issues. They might be sealed for a reason. I felt the weight of his warning settle in my chest. The thought that whatever haunted the subway might be contained there both terrified and fascinated me. That night, I decided I had to see the tunnel one last time, not to explore, but to understand. To face whatever was waiting in the fog. I packed a bag, my flashlight, recorder, pepper spray, and a small knife, more for comfort than defense. I told no one where I was going. As I approached the subway entrance, the city noise faded behind me, replaced by the cold silence of the underground. The fog was there, swirling like a living mist, thick and clinging to the walls. The whispers began almost immediately, soft, mournful, pulling at the edges of my mind. I swallowed hard, shining my light down the tracks. "Who are you?" I asked, voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. The whispers grew louder, weaving into a haunting melody, a plea or a warning I couldn't yet understand. Then, out of the fog, shapes began to form, shadows shifting with no clear form, barely visible but undeniably there. My heart slammed against my ribs. I felt the weight again, that heavy presence pressing down. And then a voice, clear and cold, spoke directly to me. "You should not be here." I froze, every muscle tensed as the voice echoed through the tunnel. It wasn't angry or threatening, it was something colder, more distant, like the chill of an ancient warning. "Why are you here?" I managed to whisper. The shadows writhed, swirling closer, forming vague shapes that flickered at the edge of my flashlight's beam. The whispers returned, louder now, filling the space with a tangled web of sound. "You seek answers that will bind you," the voice said, almost sorrowful. A surge of panic hit me, but curiosity kept me rooted. "What do you mean? What are you?" The voice seemed to hesitate, then replied, "A guardian. A prisoner. A warning." The fog thickened, and I felt the air grow heavier, as if the tunnel itself was breathing around me. Suddenly, the shapes lunged forward, not with violence but with urgency. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath fogging in the beam of my light. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and the voices faded into a low hum, leaving a heavy silence that pressed against my skin. I ran back toward the station entrance, my steps echoing wildly, adrenaline screaming through my veins. Once outside, the cold night air hit my face like a shock, and the oppressive weight lifted. I never returned to that subway line. But sometimes, when the city is quiet, and I'm alone, I swear I still hear the whispers just beneath the surface, a reminder that some doors are better left unopened. That night haunted me for weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel that cold grip tightening around my chest, the weight of those unseen eyes watching from the darkness. I tried to push it away, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks, the stress of working alone in a creepy, abandoned place. But then, strange things started happening. At first, it was small stuff, flickering lights in my apartment, the feeling of being watched when no one was there, shadows moving just beyond my vision. I would turn, but nothing was ever there. Sometimes, late at night, I heard faint whispers, just like those in the tunnel, drifting through the silence. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something had followed me home. One night, I woke up to the sound of breathing, slow, steady, right beside my bed. My heart nearly stopped. I flipped on the light, but the room was empty. The air felt thick, like someone was still there, invisible but close enough to touch. I couldn't sleep after that. I started researching the subway line's history, hoping for some logical explanation. What I found was disturbing. Decades ago, there had been reports of strange disappearances and unexplained accidents along that stretch. Some said the tunnel was cursed, a place where restless spirits lingered. Others spoke of a guardian, a dark presence that protected the underground from those who didn't belong. I didn't know what I had encountered, but I was certain it wasn't just fog or imagination. Something was real, and it was still out there. Eventually, I quit the job. The fear wasn't worth the paycheck. But sometimes, when the city sleeps, I still hear those whispers in the wind, calling me back to the darkness I barely escaped. After quitting, I tried to move on, but the feeling never left me. Even in broad daylight, I'd catch glimpses of shadows that vanished when I blinked, or hear faint murmurs that no one else seemed to notice. Friends asked if I was okay, but how could I explain something I couldn't prove? One evening, about a month later, I decided to revisit the tunnel. Not the whole way in, just the entrance, to see if facing it head-on might help me put it behind me. The air was colder than I remembered, and an unnatural silence hung over the area, like the city itself was holding its breath. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, heart pounding. For a moment, nothing. Then, the fog began to swirl again, the same slow circle from before. And I heard it, the whispering voices, just beyond understanding, rising and falling like the tide. But this time, there was something different. A figure emerged, just a shadow at first, then more defined, a tall, dark silhouette with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. It didn't move toward me, but it didn't retreat either. It just watched. Frozen, I whispered, "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer, but the whispers grew louder, filling my mind with images, lost souls trapped underground, warnings to stay away, a presence bound to the tunnel, ancient and unforgiving. I stumbled back, heart racing, and didn't stop running until the city's noise swallowed up the eerie silence of that place. I never went back again. Sometimes, though, when the night is quiet and the fog rolls in thick, I still feel that presence just beyond sight, waiting, watching. And I know that some things never really leave you, they follow, lingering in the shadows of your mind, reminding you that the darkness is always closer than you think. Days turned into weeks, and though I tried to bury the memory, it haunted my every step. The whispers seemed to echo in my dreams, growing louder each night until I could barely tell if I was awake or still trapped in that tunnel. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself staring out my window. The street lights flickered, and the fog rolled in thick again, curling around the sidewalks like ghostly fingers. That's when I heard it, faint footsteps on the gravel outside. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. The footsteps grew closer, slow and deliberate, but when I looked out, there was no one there. Just shadows dancing in the fog. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, and the whispering came again, low, unintelligible, yet unmistakably real. It was like the tunnel had followed me home. I shut the window, locking it tight, but the feeling didn't leave. It seeped into my skin, wrapped around my thoughts like a dark shroud. From that night on, I knew I wasn't just being followed in the woods or the tunnel, whatever it was, it had found me. And it wasn't done yet. I started noticing other things too, small, subtle at first. My lights would flicker even when the weather was clear. Electronics would turn on by themselves, my TV blaring static in the middle of the night, my phone lighting up with no notifications. One evening, as I brushed my teeth, I caught a glimpse of movement behind me in the mirror. A blur, like someone ducking out of sight. I spun around, heart slamming in my chest, but the bathroom was empty. I tried to laugh it off, but my reflection didn't match. It lingered half a second longer than I did, staring back at me with wide, unblinking eyes. I stopped using mirrors after that. The worst part was the sound. The whispers. They were no longer confined to sleep or silence. I'd hear them when I was on the phone, in the background of calls. I even recorded one of them, just static, at first, then a faint voice that seemed to say my name. Friends started asking if I was okay. I gave them excuses, stress, lack of sleep, too much caffeine. But I could see it in their eyes. They knew something was wrong. One night, I woke to find my front door wide open. I know I had locked it. I always lock it. There was mud on the threshold, and faint prints that looked wrong. Too long, too narrow, like something not meant to walk upright had passed through. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. And I haven't slept well since. I started keeping every light in the house on. I bought new locks, even a security camera system, one of those motion-activated types that sends alerts to your phone. I told myself it was just for peace of mind. just to confirm I wasn't going crazy. The first night I set it up, nothing happened. The second night, I got a motion alert at 3:17 a.m. My heart pounded as I opened the app. The footage was grainy, but there was movement. A shape near my front porch. Not walking. Not crawling. Just appearing. It was tall, lean, and seemed to flicker in and out of focus, like it didn't belong in this world, like it struggled to stay visible. I stared at the frame, unable to process what I was looking at. Then it turned. Slowly. Toward the camera. It didn't have a face. Just a stretched, smooth surface, like wet paper over bone. Then the footage cut out. No glitch, no signal drop, just black. I checked the porch in the morning. Nothing was disturbed. No prints, no scratches, no signs anyone had been there. But the camera feed wouldn't load anymore. Every other one worked fine, just that one angle was permanently corrupted. From then on, it escalated. Whispers followed me into my dreams. I'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, the name of something I couldn't remember dying on my lips. Objects started moving on their own, kitchen drawers open in the morning, chairs out of place, the faucet running full blast. Sometimes I'd find clumps of damp hair in the shower. Long, black strands. I live alone. I have short hair. One night, I tried sleeping in the living room with all the lights on, hoping the brightness would make it stop. But around 2 a.m., the power went out. Every bulb, every device, dead. I sat there, frozen, unable to move, until the temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. Then came the knock at the window. It was soft. Deliberate. 3 times. I live on the 3rd floor. I slammed the emergency button again, harder this time, but the elevator didn't even slow down. The rattling intensified, and for a split second, I thought the whole thing was going to come off its cables and crash straight into the basement. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the elevator jolted to a stop. Hard. I fell to my knees, catching myself on the floor with one hand. My breath was ragged. The lights flickered once more, then stabilized into a dim, sickly yellow glow. The panel was dead. Every button was unlit. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. The doors didn't open. There was no indication of what floor I was on, if I was even still in the building. I pressed my ear to the metal wall, listening for any sound outside. Nothing. Not even the faint hum of the building's old ventilation system. I was sealed in absolute silence. I pressed my hand against the door seam and tried to force it open, but it didn't budge. Then, faintly, I heard it. A low hum. It wasn't mechanical. It was vocal. Like a choir of whispers humming in harmony. My skin broke out in goosebumps. The sound seemed to come from below me, vibrating through the floor of the elevator. I backed into the corner, my fingers clutching the railing tightly. I wasn't alone in here, or at least, not entirely. A loud clang echoed from above, and I instinctively looked up. Something had landed on the roof of the elevator. The whole car shook with the weight. I held my breath. It sounded like heavy boots shuffling just above my head. Then came a dragging sound, metallic and slow, like something being scraped across the ceiling. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. Suddenly, the overhead lights in the elevator blinked off. Total darkness swallowed me. I fumbled for my phone, praying the battery still had some charge. The screen glowed as I unlocked it. No signal. Of course. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it upward. The metal ceiling above me looked the same, but the sounds had stopped. Whatever had been up there was either waiting, or gone. Then the floor beneath me groaned, like the cables were under some unnatural strain. The hum resumed, louder this time, more urgent. The elevator began to move, but not downward. Up. Slowly. Painfully slow. The car rose without any floor indicators or stopping points. I stood frozen, staring at the door, trying to anticipate what would be waiting for me when it opened. After what felt like several minutes, the elevator stopped again with a gentle jolt. The lights buzzed back on. The door opened without warning. But what lay beyond wasn't my office floor, it wasn't any floor I recognized. The hallway outside was dark, longer than it should have been, with old wallpaper peeling down the walls in strips. The air smelled like mildew and dust, and the ceiling lights were dim red, like emergency lighting from decades ago. I didn't step out. I couldn't. My body refused to move. But something in that hallway moved instead. A shadow, long and thin, crossed the far end of the corridor, too fast to identify, too smooth to be human. My heart pounded in my chest as the whispering sound returned, clearer now, closer. I leaned toward the hallway just slightly, flashlight shaking in my hand. The whispering words were indecipherable, but rhythmic, like a chant. Then I saw them. Not clearly, but enough. 3 silhouettes, standing at the far end of the hall. Their outlines flickered like static. Not people, not ghosts. Something else. My legs gave out. I hit the elevator floor with a thud, my back pressed to the rear wall. The silhouettes didn't move forward, they just stood there, watching. The whispers rose like a crescendo, like they were calling something. Calling me. And then the door slammed shut. The elevator jolted and started descending again. I didn't get up. I stayed on the floor, shaking, until the elevator came to a slow stop and the doors opened once more, this time onto the regular lobby. The fluorescent lights were humming normally. The front desk was empty, and the night security monitor was showing static. But the normalcy was almost worse. I stumbled out, half expecting to be yanked back by something unseen, but nothing followed. I left the building that night without grabbing my things, without locking up, without even looking back. I've never used that old elevator again, and I never will. And sometimes, when I pass it during the day, I swear I still hear that faint whispering behind the doors. Waiting. And fell like waves, never forming a sentence. I moved the flashlight beam across the tracks, checking for any sign of a person, nothing. The fog itself shifted, rotating in a slow spiral like it was alive. I felt pins and needles in my fingers. I stepped back. My knees felt shaky. I wanted to get out of there, but I also felt this pull to keep going. The job demanded I investigate. Maybe it was a chemical leak, maybe some weird effect from the old ventilation system, but the wind direction inside that tunnel was subtle. It usually pushed from one side to the other, not in circles. And I had never seen, or heard, anything like those whispers. My throat felt dry and my breathing sped up. I took another step toward the fog. The whispers grew louder, though I still couldn't grasp any clear words. The sound seemed to vibrate in my ears. My chest tightened. I pointed my flashlight at the swirling mass. The beam cut through it, revealing little droplets of moisture suspended in the air. But then it moved. It drifted sideways against the faint breeze that usually blew through the tunnel. It moved in the opposite direction, as though it had its own current. My spine tingled. My radio crackled. I jumped and nearly dropped my flashlight. I grabbed the radio and pressed the button. "This is Rick," I said. My voice came out shaky. "Everything's normal here." I lied. I released the button and waited. No response, just static. I tapped the radio a few times, but it stayed silent. The fog drifted further down the tracks, and I caught a whiff of something bitter in the air. It reminded me of old electronics or maybe burned plastic. It wasn't pleasant. My eyes started to water. I decided to follow it. I walked carefully, shining the light ahead. My footsteps sounded uneven. My breath felt shallow. The whispers pulsed in and out like they came from deep in the tunnel walls. Each time I tried to focus on them, I felt a slight headache build behind my eyes. My hands trembled, so I gripped the flashlight tighter. The baton at my belt felt useless. I had never thought about using it on fog. After about 30 feet, I realized I was moving deeper than I usually went. The overhead lights were far behind me. It was mostly darkness except for my flashlight beam. The rails gleamed a little in the light. The tunnel smelled more stagnant here. The water dripping from the ceiling sounded louder. My boots splashed through small puddles. I felt claustrophobic. The wall seemed closer. My heart pounded harder. The fog slowed, almost as if it was waiting for me. I closed the distance. The whispers rose, echoing in my skull. My mouth felt dry. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what. My tongue felt stuck. That's when a sudden gust blew through the tunnel, pushing against my back. My jacket ruffled and I heard grit skitter across the concrete. But the fog moved the other way, right into the wind's face. It was like it defied the current. I stopped and stared. My body tensed. My instincts told me to back away, but I didn't move. I was too curious, or too stupid, to leave. I tried to wave my hand through the fog. I reached out slowly. My arm trembled. The moment my fingertips touched that mist, I felt a shock, like static electricity snapping on my skin. I yanked my hand back. My heart jumped. The whispers flared in volume, then dropped again. They sounded upset, or excited. I couldn't tell. My breathing turned ragged. I felt sweat trickle down my forehead, and my stomach churned. I took a step back. My foot slipped on the wet rail and I nearly fell. The flashlight beam jerked around the walls, revealing graffiti tags and chipped paint. A loud clang echoed from somewhere behind me. I spun around, shining the light toward the noise. Nothing moved. I just saw the empty track. My pulse hammered in my ears. I turned back to the fog, but it was a few feet away now. It was drifting again, continuing deeper into the tunnel. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to turn around and call it a night, let the weird fog do its thing. But I couldn't just ignore it. It was my job to investigate. My mind raced with questions. Could there be a gas leak causing hallucinations? Could I be breathing some toxic fumes making me hear things? But the physical sensation of that static jolt felt too real to be my imagination. I forced myself forward. My muscles felt stiff. My throat was tight. Each time the whispers rose, my scalp prickled. It sounded like multiple voices merging, but no single voice was clear. I wondered if I should cover my ears. I tried once, but that made the sound echo inside my head. It was worse. So I just kept walking, letting my flashlight guide me. The deeper I went, the darker it got. The overhead lights didn't reach this part. My beam cut through the space, but the shadows pressed in on the edges. The fog glowed a little when the light hit it. I smelled that bitter, burned plastic scent again, and it made me cough. My eyes watered. I wiped my face with my sleeve. My legs felt wobbly. My mind kept telling me to be careful. The ground was slick and the rails were cold under my feet. I decided to try the radio again. I pressed the button. "Rick here," I said, my voice shaky. "I'm down the tunnel tracking some sort of fog." Strange whispers. "Has anyone else reported something like this?" I released the button. Static. Then a faint click. I waited, but no response came. Just a faint hiss. My heart sank. I clipped the radio back to my belt and wiped the sweat from my brow. The fog paused, rotating slowly near a bend in the tunnel. The curvature of the walls made the whispers bounce around in weird ways. I stepped closer, feeling my arms tense. My flashlight caught the swirling shapes in that mist. It wasn't any color in particular, just a gray, milky swirl, but it moved in patterns that seemed deliberate. I stared, and my mouth went dry. The whispering rose to a new level. It echoed in my head, and I felt an uncomfortable pressure. My ears popped. My temples throbbed. I clenched my jaw. My eyes darted around, searching for any normal explanation. I saw old cables hanging from the ceiling. Water dripping in thick drops. Some rusted pipes along the walls. The fog hovered a foot off the ground, swirling in a lazy circle. Then it spread out, forming a thin sheet along the tracks. The whispering shifted in pitch, like it was stretching. My body felt locked in place. My heartbeat pounded in my temples. I tried to breathe slowly, but my lungs raced. I took one shaky step forward. The wet gravel under my boot gave a crunch. Then, out of nowhere, the whispers surged, blasting me with a wave of sound. I stumbled. My flashlight flickered. I heard that static electricity crackle in the air. The hair on my arms rose. The fog whipped around as if caught in a sudden vortex. It spun faster, creating a small whirlwind of damp air. I braced myself against the wall. My fingertips pressed into the cold concrete. My chest felt tight. The spinning fog started gliding down the tunnel again, but faster this time. I forced my legs to move. The water dripped louder behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps. Part of me wanted to turn back and run. Another part couldn't let it go. I didn't want to be the guy who saw something strange and just quit. I had this urge to see it through, though I can't explain why. The tunnel sloped downward slightly. I slipped once or twice on the wet metal. Each time I almost dropped my flashlight. The whispering never stopped. Sometimes it faded a bit, but it always returned. My throat hurt. My body tensed so hard that my shoulders ached. The baton clanked at my side with each step, reminding me I had no clue how to fight a fog. I pressed on. After another 30 or 40 yards, the fog came to a halt. It hovered near a pile of old debris. There was an abandoned electrical box with wires sticking out, some broken wood planks, and a few old metal scraps. The place smelled like rotting metal, if that's even a thing. A bitter tang burned my nostrils. The whispers rose and fell, never forming anything I could understand. I inched closer, shining the light over the pile. My flashlight flickered again, like the battery was failing. I tapped it with my palm, and it steadied. I saw nothing unusual in the debris, just rust and dirt. But the fog circled above it, twisting in a slow spiral. I heard a faint crackle of electricity. My ears buzzed. I touched my ear, thinking maybe I was having a reaction to the environment, but the sound persisted, a soft popping hum. I held my breath and took another step. My throat tightened. The tension in my chest felt like a band around my lungs. The whispering rose again, and I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. The fog swirled faster, then stretched toward me. I saw it drifting closer like a creeping hand. My heart hammered. My hands trembled. I raised the baton instinctively, even though it was pointless. My flashlight beam shook on the concrete floor. Suddenly, the radio crackled again, this time it blasted with static so loud I winced. I nearly dropped it. I pulled it off my belt and pressed the button, but I heard nothing but high-pitched interference. The fog whipped around, reacting to the noise. The voices changed pitch, rising higher. The sound vibrated through my teeth. I felt a jolt of panic. My breath caught in my throat. The pressure in the air felt stifling, like the oxygen had thinned out. I stumbled back. The debris clattered under my boot and a piece of wood snapped. The sudden noise echoed in the tunnel. The fog recoiled, swirling away a few feet. I took the chance to back away, shining the light on the floor to avoid tripping. My legs were shaky. I wanted to breathe fresh air again. My mouth was full of that bitter taste. My eyes burned. I coughed hard, struggling to catch my breath. I kept the flashlight on the fog, stepping backwards slowly. Each time I moved, it shifted, like it was deciding whether to follow. The whispering faded a bit, replaced by that distant drip and the hum of the radio static. My boots splashed in small puddles as I made my way back. My shoulders were sore from tension. I didn't realize I'd been clenching my teeth until my jaw started to ache. Eventually I reached a part of the tunnel where the overhead lights were still faintly visible. The air felt slightly less damp. I glanced over my shoulder, seeing the platform in the distance. Relief washed over me, but I still couldn't shake the tremors in my hands. I looked back at the fog. It lingered near that debris, swirling in place. The whispers stayed in my head, even though I couldn't hear them as clearly anymore. It felt like they had burrowed into my mind. I turned and hurried toward the platform. I didn't stop walking until I was back on the platform, under the buzz of the overhead lights. The moment I stepped out of the tunnel, I collapsed onto the bench, heart racing, sweat soaking through my undershirt. I wiped my face, but my hands were shaking too hard to steady anything. I stared at the tunnel's mouth, half expecting the fog to spill out after me. But it didn't. It just stayed there, coiled in the darkness. The whispers had faded, but not entirely. I could still feel them, like a tune stuck in my head, or a memory trying to resurface. I reached for my radio again. "This is Rick," I said, voice hoarse. "I need someone down here. Now. There's something in the tunnel." I paused. "It's not a person. I don't know what it is." Static buzzed, then finally a voice crackled through. "Rick. You okay? You sound off." It was Kevin from Surface Patrol. "I'm not okay," I replied. "Something's down here." I'm not hallucinating. I touched it. It shocked me. It moves. It whispers. A long silence. Stay put, Kevin said. I'm sending someone down. I leaned back against the wall, my breath slowly evening out. The cool metal of the bench seeped through my uniform. I felt sick, and every few seconds I'd glance back at the tunnel. Still empty. Still quiet, at least to the ear. But inside my skull, the faint echo of that whispering still lingered, like it had imprinted itself. 15 minutes passed before I heard the familiar sound of boots approaching. Kevin came down the stairs with a flashlight, looking skeptical. What the hell happened? He asked. I stood, knees still wobbly. I followed the fog. It wasn't like normal condensation. It moved on its own. Against the wind. It whispered, dozens of voices. I tried to touch it. Got shocked. It hovered around this debris pile farther down the tunnel. I gestured, but Kevin frowned. You went that deep? He aimed his flashlight toward the tunnel and clicked it on. Let's see it then. I hesitated. Every cell in my body screamed not to go back in. But I nodded and followed him. We moved slowly, our boots echoing off the concrete. The tunnel felt colder than before, like the fog had pulled the heat out of the air. When we reached the bend, Kevin slowed down. You said it was around here. Farther down, I said. Near a broken electrical box and a pile of debris. You'll smell it before you see it. Sure enough, that bitter burned plastic scent hit us both. Kevin coughed and pulled his sleeve over his nose. Christ! What is that? We kept moving. I could feel the tension building in my chest again. The whispers started to return, faint but recognizable. I flinched, waiting to see Kevin's reaction. He paused. You hear that? I nodded. It gets worse the closer we get. We rounded the next bend, and froze. The fog was still there. Hovering just above the rails, coiling slowly like it was waiting. Kevin cursed under his breath. That's not normal, he whispered. The mist pulsed. Not visually, somehow it felt like it pulsed. Like a living thing sensing attention. The whispering grew louder. Kevin stepped back. I think we've seen enough, he said, voice tight. But just as we turned, the fog stretched forward, fast. It didn't touch us, but it closed the distance halfway in a blink. Kevin shouted and raised his flashlight. Back. Move. We ran. I'd never seen Kevin sprint before, but he moved like hell was on his heels. My legs burned, but I kept up. We burst out of the tunnel and didn't stop until we reached the stairs. At the top, gasping for air, Kevin looked back once. The fog didn't follow. He turned to me. Whatever that thing is, he said, we're sealing that section off. The section was sealed by morning. Kevin filed the report himself. Said the structural integrity of the tunnel was compromised and that there was an unidentified electrical hazard, both technically true. What he left out, of course, was the fog, the whispers, and the way it moved like it had a mind. We both agreed, some truths didn't need to go in official records. Over the next few days, I worked day shifts. I requested them without explaining why, and no one asked questions. The entire time, I couldn't shake the sound of that whispering, like it had worked its way into my subconscious. I started hearing it in white noise, from the radio, the vents, even the hiss of the coffee machine. Always faint. Always at the edge of meaning. I didn't sleep much. And when I did, my dreams were all the same. That tunnel. The fog. And a shape inside it. Something that watched without eyes. Something that waited. Then, on the third day, I got a call at home. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. But when I picked up, the voice on the other end said only one thing. Do not forget the name Jericho Bend. And hung up. My blood went cold. I didn't recognize the voice. Male. Calm. Almost professional. But there was something off about the way he said it. Like it wasn't just a warning, more like a command. Like he knew I'd already encountered something, and that I'd need that name later. I googled it. Jericho Bend. At first, nothing. A few random hits, some real estate listings, a song title. But then I dug deeper. There was an archived article from a 1982 edition of the Herald Standard in Pennsylvania. The headline read: 5 workers missing in subway expansion site tunnel sealed indefinitely. The article was short. Claimed that during a routine expansion project, a section of tunnel collapsed. Emergency crews recovered no bodies. The survivors, 2 electricians, reported strange fog, hallucinations, and a persistent humming sound. OSHA shut down the project. The area was sealed off. Officially, it was labeled Unstable Rock Formations. Unofficially, it was called the Jericho Bend Incident. I sat back in my chair, heart thudding. It wasn't just our station. This had happened before. And it had been buried. I looked over at the window. The rain was coming down hard, streaking the glass. For a second, I thought I saw a silhouette standing under the street lamp. No umbrella. No movement. Just watching. I blinked, and it was gone. I turned back to the article. Buried near the bottom was a quote from one of the electricians before he was taken off-site for psychological evaluation. He'd said, "It talks to you. It remembers. It doesn't live in the tunnel. The tunnel lives in it." The quote stuck with me. All day. All night. By morning, I had made up my mind. I needed to go back. I waited until my next day off. Didn't tell Kevin. Didn't tell anyone. Just packed a flashlight, gloves, a crowbar, and that old maintenance badge from my first year, just in case someone questioned why I was down there. The sealed section hadn't been touched. The plywood was still up, but I knew how to get around it. There was a secondary access route through the old boiler corridor. You had to duck low and crawl for about 10 feet, but it bypassed the sealed section completely. I brought a knife this time. Just a utility blade, but it made me feel less helpless. The air changed the second I stepped past the barrier. Heavy. Metallic. The silence wasn't natural either. It pressed in like the absence of noise had mass. My flashlight flickered once, then stabilized. The tunnel was just as we left it. No movement. No fog. I kept walking. The further I went, the colder it got. And then, the whispers returned. Faint. Rhythmic. Not words exactly, more like syllables, repeated in patterns just beyond comprehension. They weren't coming from ahead. They were behind me. I turned. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing. But the flashlight dimmed slightly. Then I saw it, on the wall. A symbol etched into the brick in what looked like old black soot, or maybe something darker. A rough spiral, intersected by a single vertical line. I traced it lightly with my glove. The brick under it was warm. That made no sense. It was freezing down here. I kept going. About 50 feet in, I reached the drop-off. The edge of the pit where the tunnel had collapsed. Except now, it wasn't collapsed. It was open. I swear to you, that rubble we saw before, it was gone. In its place was a steep, descending ramp made of old concrete. Too smooth to be from modern construction. It looked ancient. I stood there, gripping the flashlight tight enough to hurt my hand. Then I heard it again. Not the whispers. Something else. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate. Coming from below. I backed away slowly. But the moment I turned around, I was face to face with Kevin. Except it wasn't him. Not really. Same face, same uniform, but his eyes were wrong. Too dark. No shine to them. Just black glassy pits like the eyes of something deep underwater. He smiled. "Glad you came back," he said, voice low and lead, like more than one person was speaking at once. I stumbled backward. He didn't follow. He just tilted his head and added, "You're part of it now." Then, without another word, he walked past me, toward the ramp, and disappeared into the dark. And the tunnel sighed. Like it was breathing. I didn't run. I couldn't. My legs didn't work right. I just stood there, breathing like I'd forgotten how, the light from my flashlight bouncing off the tunnel walls in shaky circles. Kevin was gone. No footsteps. No echo. Just that suffocating silence again, but now it felt alive. Watching. Listening. I took a shaky step backward. Then another. Every instinct screamed to turn and run, but something in the air, some pressure, held me in place. Like if I moved too fast, I'd break whatever thin thread of safety I had left. Eventually, I found the strength to move. I didn't go back toward the ramp. I turned and took the long way around, crawling back through the boiler corridor until I hit the plywood barrier, then pushed through. When I stepped into the basement hallway, it felt like emerging from underwater. I collapsed to my knees and just sat there, soaked in sweat, heart hammering. My flashlight flickered once and then went dark. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. I couldn't. What would I say? Hey, I followed a tunnel into the guts of our building, saw a fake version of Kevin, and now I think the basement's alive. No one would believe it. No one except maybe Maya. I knocked on her door later that night. She answered fast, like she'd been waiting. Her eyes scanned my face and she just nodded. "You went back," she said quietly. I nodded. Her hands were trembling. She let me in without another word. The lights in her apartment were off except for a few candles. The place smelled like sage and something metallic. She locked the door behind us, then sat me down at the kitchen table. "There's more to this," she said. "It's not just the attic. Not just the basement. The whole building is infected." I stared at her. Infected. Like a host. It's not a haunting. It's not even a place. It's a thing. It's here. And it's growing. She leaned in close. "And it remembers you now." I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I kept picturing Kevin, that Kevin, tilting his head with those wrong, too smooth movements. The way he looked at me like I was something it hadn't decided what to do with yet. And Maya's words echoed, over and over. It remembers you now. I stayed up on the couch, every light on, watching the shadows stretch and twitch along the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, maybe on the roof or in the walls, I could hear movement. It wasn't loud, just a soft dragging sound, like something with long limbs crawling just out of sight. The next morning, I tried to act normal. Coffee. Shower. Work shirt. But when I opened my door, there was something on my welcome mat. A feather. Large. Black. Too big for any bird I knew. I picked it up carefully. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally cold, like metal pulled from ice. Then I looked up and saw my attic hatch, still sealed shut. But something had scratched at the paint. 4 long marks across the panel, like claws had tried to dig their way down. I stepped back into my apartment and closed the door. Locked it. Deadbolt. Chain. Then I took the feather and threw it in the trash under a pile of old takeout. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That evening, I heard footsteps above me again. Slow. Deliberate. Scraping. Maya texted me. Stay inside tonight. No matter what you hear. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want answers anymore. But around 2 a.m., someone knocked at my door. 3 soft taps. Then silence. Then. It's me. Kevin. Let me in, man. My stomach dropped. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe. Come on. I forgot my keys. Same voice. Same cadence. Just like before. But Kevin was still missing. I backed into the corner of the room and waited. Eventually, the voice stopped. But I never heard footsteps walking away. Just the soft sound of something dragging itself back up into the attic. When I reached the conference room door, I managed to push it open. Inside, the furniture was exactly as I remembered, a long table surrounded by chairs, a whiteboard mounted on the wall. But everything was coated with a thin layer of dust. The windows were there, but beyond the glass, there were no city lights, only complete darkness. I pressed my forehead against the glass, hoping the city's glow was just obscured by something, but I saw nothing. No cars. No street lamps. No moon. It was as if the building floated in the middle of an endless void. My pulse quickened again. The silence pressed down on me, suffocating. I thought maybe the best move was to return to the elevator and see if it would move to a different floor. If I could at least get to the lobby, maybe I'd find an exit unlocked. I hurried back toward the elevator, checking a few offices on the way. All were locked tight. A cold tightness squeezed my chest. The place felt dead, not decayed, just empty and cold. My fingertips were numb when I reached the elevator doors. They were closed. I pressed the button, but nothing happened. I tried to pry the doors open with my fingers, but they wouldn't budge. My phone's battery was draining fast from using the flashlight, so I turned it off for a moment and stood there in the darkness. My heart pounded. Sweat trickled down my back, even though the air was chilly. I told myself to stay calm, but my mind was racing. Tentatively, I called out, "Hello." My voice sounded shaky. No reply. It felt like I was trapped in a giant, empty box with no exit. I moved down the hallway to the bathrooms, hoping they might be open. The men's room door creaked as I pushed it. Inside, the smell of old disinfectant hung thick in the air. My phone's beam revealed 2 sinks, a mirror, and 3 stalls. I turned the faucet, only a weak trickle of water came out. I splashed some on my face, trying to stay alert. The water was cold, and my reflection in the mirror looked pale, eyes wide and frightened. Anxiety surged through me. I dried my hands on my pants and left the bathroom, walking toward the far end of the floor. More offices, all locked. Then a break room with a small fridge and a microwave. The fridge was warm and silent inside, stale odors spilling out when I opened it. I checked my phone. Only a few minutes had passed since I'd first arrived on this strange, deserted floor, but it felt like hours. I tried my phone again, no signal. Determined, I headed to the main doors leading to the hallway where the new elevator was. Passing the locked offices, my footsteps echoed loudly in the stillness. The double doors to the reception area were partially open. I stepped through into darkness. The reception desk sat silent, the phone dead, no dial tone on any line. I lifted the receiver, pressing buttons, nothing. Tension coiled in my shoulders, my neck stiffened. The feeling that I was trapped in some twisted loop gnawed at me. I circled the desk and shone my flashlight at the glass doors that usually led to the elevator bank. They weren't glass anymore, just dark, sliding panels, jammed shut. No reflections. No light behind them, only a solid black void. Pressing my shoulder against the doors did nothing. I leaned my light into the narrow gap and saw nothing but emptiness. My stomach churned. I backed away, trying to slow my breath. The low battery warning flashed on my phone. I turned the flashlight off to conserve power. Standing there in the darkness, the memory of the elevator drop tightened my gut, the drop without passing any floors or hearing the usual ding. Now everything felt disconnected, as if the building existed apart from the world. I needed a plan. Returning to the elevator doors I'd exited earlier, I resolved to keep trying to pry them open. If that failed, I'd search for a tool in the break room or the electrical room. On the way back, the hairs on my arms prickled again. The silence pressed in from all sides. My breathing sounded loud, alien. At the elevator doors, I searched for a release latch, but the panel was sealed shut. Pressing the button again, no response. I crouched down and tried to wedge my fingers under the doors, but they wouldn't move. Frustration and adrenaline made my legs tremble. Standing, I flicked my phone flashlight back on. Battery was down to 10%. I scanned the door edges for something to grip when suddenly, a faint click echoed through the hallway. I froze. I spun, shining my light down the corridor. At the far end, a door I'd seen closed minutes before was now open. It was one of the offices. Swallowing hard, I wasn't sure whether to feel relief at the sign of movement or dread. My pulse hammered in my ears as I walked toward the door, flashlight slicing through the darkness. Inside, the office was empty. A desk, a couple of chairs, a file cabinet with drawers left slightly ajar. A flicker of movement behind the desk caught my eye. I stepped closer and realized it was my own reflection in a window. No one else was there. The desk held an unplugged phone and a laptop without its power cord. I pressed the laptop's power button, nothing. Disappointment washed over me. The file cabinet drawers contained only some old, yellowed forms. My phone buzzed with a 5% battery warning. I needed to act fast. Turning to leave, the elevator dinged, a soft, haunting tone echoing down the hall. My chest tightened. I sprinted back. The elevator doors stood open, the flickering light inside just like before. No one emerged. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The panel lit up. I pressed the lobby button. The doors shut. The car shook, not dropped, but moved slowly upward. Odd, since the lobby should be below. I clenched my fists and waited. The doors slid open. My heart pounded. I was back on the original floor. But the lights were on, and everything looked normal, the usual fluorescent glow, the reception desk, my office down the hall. It was like the strange, empty floor had never existed. The elevator doors closed silently behind me, no flickers, no rush of air. Just quiet. I heard a vacuum humming down the corridor, a janitor cleaning. He looked up, asked if I was okay. I wanted to explain, but how could I? Instead, I said I was dizzy and needed to get home. I took the newer elevator down to the lobby and left the building. Outside, nothing seemed strange. The security guard nodded as I passed, unaware of the surreal experience inside. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the drop, the emptiness. The next morning, everything at work was normal. No mention of power outages or weird events. The old elevator still stood silent, and I avoided it. Every time I heard an elevator chime, my stomach flipped. I haven't gone near that old elevator since, and I don't plan to. The first time I noticed the stain on my loft wall was the day I moved in. Late afternoon, after the movers left, I leaned against the living room wall, catching my breath. My eyes drifted across the open space, then caught on a dark, wet patch on the far wall. It stood out, a blurry outline of a head, shoulders, and torso, like a shadow frozen against the white paint. At first, I told myself it was just water damage left by the previous tenant, but a creeping unease settled in my chest. I put down my toolbox and touched the spot. It was cool and damp, a slight musty smell clinging to the air. The rest of the wall was dry. I shrugged and told myself I'd deal with it later. The next day, I woke early to unpack. I planned to set up a home office but knew I had to fix that stain first. Walking into the living room, I stopped dead. The silhouette wasn't where I'd left it. It had shifted, now several feet higher, near the ceiling. I circled the room, eyes wide. The outline looked like a person leaning forward. Beneath it, faint discolorations dotted the floor like drops of water. My stomach twisted with dread. I tried calling the building manager, no answer. I started to jot down notes, times, locations, movement patterns. Each evening the stain moved again. By the time I painted over it, the outline would return, bigger and more defined. Days passed in a blur of anxiety. I hired a handyman, a plumber, an electrician, each found nothing wrong. No leaks, no moisture, no wiring issues. The stain persisted. Sometimes it looked smaller, sometimes wider. The smell fluctuated, from damp concrete to nothing at all. The silhouette shifted positions by the hour, near the ceiling at dawn, near the floor by dusk. At night, I woke often, my hands trembling, eyes watering. The dripping sound behind the wall was irregular but persistent. The feeling of being watched was constant. I tried everything, paint, primer, sealant, air purifiers, even sleeping elsewhere. Nothing worked. Now, as I type this with the silhouette on my left, about eye level, its edges dark and damp smelling, my heart races and my hands shake. Tomorrow, I'll call the building manager again. If he can't help. That night, I couldn't sleep. The silhouette seemed to loom larger in the darkness of my room, even though it was on the opposite wall from where I lay. Every creak of the building, every distant drip, made my skin crawl. I decided to set up my phone to record the wall while I slept, hoping to catch something, anything, that could explain what was happening. I placed it on a tripod, facing the silhouette, and hit record before crawling into bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a faint sound, like slow, deliberate footsteps echoing somewhere in the loft. My breath hitched. The air felt colder, heavier. I stared at the wall where the silhouette was, barely visible in the dim light. The stain began to move. Slowly, it stretched upward, darkening at the edges. The faint sound of dripping water came again, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I grabbed my phone, still recording, and pointed the flashlight at the wall. The shape now looked unmistakably human, an outline of a figure bent forward, hands resting on knees, head hanging low. Then, as I watched frozen in place, the figure's head lifted slightly, tilting toward me. I blinked, and it vanished. The room returned to normal, except my heart was pounding so loud I thought it might burst. I checked the video in the morning. The footage was grainy, but around 2 a.m., the stain did indeed shift, elongating and moving upward, just like I'd seen. But no figure, no head movement. Just a blotch of dark dampness. I knew then that whatever this was, it wasn't natural. It wasn't simply water damage. Over the next days, the silhouette continued to move, growing more defined and sometimes even seeming to retreat, like it was aware I was watching. One afternoon, as I sat working near the wall, I felt a sudden chill. The stain was directly beside me, and I swear I heard a whisper, a breathy, distant voice that made my skin prickle. I spun around, eyes scanning the room, but I was alone. That's when I noticed something else, faint scratches around the edges of the stain, tiny grooves in the paint, like fingernails digging in. The thought that someone, or something, had been trapped behind the wall terrified me. I pushed the idea away. I had to get to the bottom of this. I started researching the building's history. The loft was part of a converted warehouse built in the 1920s. I found old blueprints online, and one thing stood out: a small, sealed-off utility closet was located directly behind that wall. No one had used it in decades. The building manager had never mentioned it. Late that night, armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, I went to the wall. I tapped along the surface, listening for hollow spots. The area with the silhouette sounded hollow, like a cavity behind the drywall. I found a faint seam in the paint and drywall that looked like an old door frame. Taking a deep breath, I wedged the crowbar into the seam and forced it open. The drywall crumbled away, revealing a narrow, dark space, a utility closet coated in dust and cobwebs. The air inside was cold and smelled of mildew. At the back of the closet, something caught my eye, an old, rusted metal panel set into the wall, with a small rectangular window. Through the grimy glass, I saw the outline of pipes and wires, but also, faintly, something else. A shadow. I stepped back, heart pounding. The air seemed to thicken around me. Suddenly, a sharp tapping came from inside the wall behind the panel. I jumped. I reached out to touch the panel, and the tapping stopped. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, a low, barely audible whisper, "Help me." I staggered back, knocking over a rusty bucket. The whisper grew louder, urgent, "Help me." I slammed the panel shut, shoved the drywall back into place, and fled my apartment. Outside, I gasped in the cold night air. My hands trembled uncontrollably. Whatever was behind that wall was trapped. And it was calling to me. 4 days afterward, I couldn't shake the voice from my mind. "Help me," it whispered, echoing in my thoughts like a persistent shadow. I avoided the apartment, staying with a friend, but the moment I returned, the atmosphere shifted, the air thickened, the silence deepened. Determined to understand, I researched every possible record on the building, from construction permits to old tenant files. That's when I uncovered something disturbing. Decades ago, a young maintenance worker named Samuel had mysteriously vanished without a trace. He was last seen near the utility closet in my loft's section. No one ever found him. My stomach turned cold. Could it be him? Was he trapped behind that wall all this time, somehow bound to the space I now lived in? That night, I returned with tools, intent on opening the panel again, but before I could, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness. I heard that same slow dripping and the faint sound of scraping nails along the wall. Then, a shadow moved across the ceiling, a shifting, writhing shape that made my blood run cold. I dropped the tools and scrambled for my phone's flashlight. The beam caught the stain on the wall. It was spreading, growing like a living thing. The silhouette wasn't just a stain anymore, it had become a doorway. A cold, guttural voice breathed from the darkness behind the panel, "Help me." I had to decide, break through and confront whatever was trapped, or run and never look back. But I couldn't ignore the voice any longer. Gripping my phone like a lifeline, I took a deep breath and pushed the panel open. The rotten wood gave way with a sickening creak, revealing a narrow, pitch-black crawl space barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. Inside, the air was thick with damp and decay. My flashlight caught on a pile of old, torn clothes and a faded, dust-covered toolbox. But what froze me in place was the figure huddled in the corner. It was a man, gaunt, pale, eyes sunken but burning with desperation. His clothes hung in tatters, and his skin was stained with grime and something dark that looked like dried blood. "Please," he rasped, voice barely more than a whisper. "Help me get out." I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to get away. But something in his eyes held me rooted. "Who are you? How did you get here?" I asked, voice trembling. He shivered, then whispered, "Samuel. I worked here years ago. They trapped me. They never wanted me found." Before I could ask who they were, the walls around us began to close in, the shadows deepening, as if the building itself was alive and angry. "Help me escape," Samuel pleaded. "Before it's too late." My heart pounded as I crawled closer to Samuel, feeling the suffocating weight of the attic pressing in around us. The air smelled worse, like mold and rust and something far fouler I couldn't place. "Who trapped you?" I whispered, trying not to sound terrified. He swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the shadows. "The landlord, and his friends. They use this place for things no one should know about." I was their mistake. A sudden noise, a low thud from somewhere below, made us both freeze. The building seemed to groan, as if warning us to leave. But I couldn't. Samuel's story had hooked me, and something told me it wasn't over. "We have to get out," I said. "Now." Samuel nodded, trying to stand but collapsing onto his knees. "I don't have much time." Helping him, I pulled him toward the hatch. The moment I pushed it open, a cold breeze blew in, carrying the faintest echo of laughter, cruel and chilling. "Run!" Samuel gasped. We scrambled down the narrow stairs just as a heavy crash echoed above us, the attic panel slamming shut with a force that shook the whole apartment. We sprinted through the alley, heartbeats pounding like drums in my ears. Behind us, The SUV's engines roared as the men gave chase, their footsteps thundering on the pavement. Samuel pulled me into a narrow gap between two buildings. "Hide here," he hissed. We crouched in the darkness, barely daring to breathe. The men slowed, their voices low but sharp. "He's here," one said. "Find the girl." The search felt endless. My fingers trembled as I gripped Samuel's arm, wishing the nightmare would end. Suddenly, a phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from an unknown number: "If you want to live, follow the instructions." Samuel's eyes met mine. "This is bigger than we thought. But we can fight back." Samuel quickly unlocked his phone, the screen lighting up with the message thread. "Unknown, go to the old warehouse on 5th. Look for the crate marked with a red X inside is what you need." I swallowed hard. This feels like a trap. Samuel shook his head, determination set in his jaw. "We have no choice. They're hunting us. This might be our only chance." We slipped out of our hiding spot and dashed toward 5th Street, the sound of footsteps and distant voices trailing us like shadows. The night air was thick with tension, every corner a potential ambush. As we reached the warehouse, its rusted doors groaned open. Inside, dust danced in the moonlight filtering through broken windows. There, in the far corner, was the crate, marked, just like the message said, with a scarlet X. Samuel pried it open. Inside was a small, unmarked device humming softly. "What is it?" I whispered. Samuel studied it for a moment. "A jammer. This could disrupt their communications and give us a way out." Suddenly, the warehouse door slammed shut behind us. The sudden slam echoed through the warehouse, freezing us in place. I whipped around to see shadows moving in the doorway, figures emerging from the darkness, their eyes gleaming with cold intent. Samuel tightened his grip on the jammer device. "We need to get out of here. Now." We darted toward a side exit, but the figures closed in quickly. Heart pounding, I spotted a narrow ventilation shaft along the wall. "Here!" I shouted, pulling Samuel toward it. We squeezed through just as the first of them lunged, missing by mere inches. The cramped shaft scraped against our skin, but it was our only escape. Crawling through the tight space, the muffled voices and footsteps grew fainter. Finally, we emerged outside, gasping for air. Samuel glanced at the jammer. "If this works, we might finally be able to stop them." A cold wind blew, carrying with it the distant howl of something unnatural. We stumbled into the dim alley, hearts still hammering, adrenaline surging through every vein. The city lights flickered overhead, but the darkness felt heavier here, thicker, like it was watching us. Samuel checked the jammer device again. "It's stabilizing, but only for a short time. We have to move fast." "What exactly are we dealing with?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He hesitated. "Not just some gang or cult. This is something else. Something older." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as a low, guttural growl reverberated from the shadows nearby. We weren't alone. Suddenly, a figure stepped out, a tall, gaunt man with eyes like burning coals and a smile that didn't reach his face. "You really think that little toy can stop what's coming?" he sneered. Samuel raised the jammer defiantly. "It has to." The man laughed, a chilling sound that seemed to freeze the very air. "You have no idea." The burning-eyed man took a slow step closer, and with each movement, the shadows behind him seemed to pulse and ripple like dark waves. Samuel's hand tightened around the jammer, the only barrier between us and whatever nightmare was about to break free. Without warning, the ground beneath us cracked and a shadowy tendril shot out, aiming straight for my ankle. I jumped back, heart pounding. The man's smile twisted into something cruel. "You can't escape what lurks beneath," he hissed. Samuel slammed the jammer down, sending a pulse of blinding light that made the shadows scream and retreat momentarily. But the figure just laughed, the sound like metal scraping bone. "We don't have much time," Samuel muttered. "We need to find the source, the place that anchors this darkness to our world." I glanced around. The alley opened into a forgotten courtyard, where an ancient, cracked fountain stood dry and lifeless. Something about it felt wrong. As we stepped closer, the temperature dropped sharply, breath misting in the cold air. Samuel pulled out an old, faded map and traced a route with trembling fingers. "This fountain marks the entrance to the underground catacombs, the origin point. If we don't seal it, this darkness will consume everything." A cold wind rushed past us, carrying with it whispers that sounded like voices from another time. "We have to go down there," I said, swallowing my fear. Before we could move, the burning-eyed man vanished into the shadows, but his warning lingered: "You're already too late." Samuel grabbed my arm, urgency sharp in his voice. "Down here," he said, pointing to a crumbling stone staircase hidden behind the fountain's broken basin. We descended slowly, the air growing heavier with each step. The walls dripped with moisture, the faint smell of earth and decay filling the space. Faint, echoing whispers bounced off the stone like a chorus of unseen voices. As we reached the bottom, the dim glow from Samuel's flashlight revealed strange symbols etched into the walls, ancient runes pulsing with a sickly green light. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath us, and a low growl echoed through the tunnels. Shadows slithered along the walls, converging into twisted forms that seemed almost alive. "We need to move fast," Samuel whispered, pulling out a small talisman glowing with a soft blue light. "This will keep the dark at bay, but only for a little while." The path forked ahead, one tunnel leading deeper into darkness, the other blocked by fallen stones. Without hesitation, Samuel led us into the deeper passage, the air growing colder and the whispers louder. Then, from the darkness ahead, a pair of glowing eyes opened, fixed on us like a predator ready to strike. The glowing eyes blinked slowly, then vanished, but not before revealing a massive silhouette slinking just beyond the beam of Samuel's flashlight. My heart hammered as I gripped his arm tighter. "We're not alone down here," he muttered, voice barely audible. Ahead, the tunnel narrowed, walls slick with something cold and wet. The whispers grew louder, twisting into unintelligible murmurs that crawled under my skin. Suddenly, a scraping noise came from behind us, something was moving closer. Samuel pulled me forward, urgency pushing us deeper into the labyrinth. The runes on the walls brightened, casting eerie shadows that danced like phantoms. We reached a rusted iron door, barely hanging on its hinges. Samuel pushed it open, revealing a small chamber filled with strange relics, old bones, faded photographs, and a cracked mirror reflecting the flickering light. "This is it," Samuel said. "The source." As we stepped inside, the whispers crescendoed into a chilling scream that seemed to come from the mirror itself. I saw something move in its depths, a pale face twisted in silent agony staring back at us. The door slammed shut behind us. The scream echoed through the chamber, reverberating off the stone walls and rattling my bones. I tried to tear my eyes away from the mirror, but that pale face held me captive, its hollow eyes burning with desperation. Samuel frantically searched the room, his fingers brushing over the relics as if hoping to find some key. "There has to be something here," he muttered, voice tense. Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled like water, distorting the face into a grotesque grin. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a loose stone. The air turned icy cold, each breath crystallizing in front of me. "Don't look away," Samuel whispered sharply. "We need to confront it." I nodded, swallowing my fear. Taking a deep breath, I stepped closer to the mirror, reaching out a trembling hand. The reflection reached back. My fingertips met cold glass, and then the surface shattered inward like a breaking ice sheet, pulling me forward. I fell through darkness, tumbling into a void where nothing made sense, time twisted, space warped. When I landed, I was somewhere else entirely. A desolate landscape stretched out, barren, cracked earth under a sky swirling with dark, roiling clouds. Far off, shadowy figures moved slowly, indistinct and flickering like smoke. I tried to call out, but no sound escaped my lips. A figure approached, tall, cloaked, face hidden beneath a hood. "You've crossed the threshold," a voice said, low and chilling. "Now, there is no turning back." I felt Samuel's presence behind me, relief flooding my chest. "We have to find a way back," I said, voice trembling. He nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. "But first, we need to face whatever's keeping us trapped here." The hooded figure vanished like a wisp of smoke. Ahead, the shadowy figures gathered, their forms twisting into monstrous shapes. I gripped Samuel's hand tightly. "This is just the beginning." We stood frozen for a moment, watching the shadowy figures coalesce into grotesque, unnatural shapes, limbs twisted at impossible angles, eyes glowing faintly with a cold light. Samuel tightened his grip on my hand. "Stay close. These things feed on fear." A guttural growl echoed across the cracked earth. The nearest figure lunged toward us, its elongated claws scraping the ground with a metallic screech. Instinctively, I grabbed a jagged shard of broken stone nearby and swung wildly. The shard passed through the creature as if it were smoke, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. The creature snarled and circled us, its movements jerky and unpredictable. "We're not in the real world anymore," Samuel said grimly. "These are echoes of the darkness trapped beyond the mirror, they have no physical form here." "But they can hurt us," I whispered, feeling a sharp pain in my arm where the creature had grazed me, a cold burning sensation that quickly faded. "We need to find the source of this place. Whatever controls these shadows will have the key to getting us back." We started moving cautiously across the cracked earth, the shadowy figures trailing us like predators stalking prey. Suddenly, a soft light appeared in the distance, a flickering flame that didn't seem to belong in this desolate realm. "Look," Samuel said, nodding toward the glow. "Maybe it's a sign." We hurried toward it, the shadows growing restless, their growls escalating into a deafening chorus. The light grew brighter, revealing a small pedestal with an ancient-looking lantern suspended above it. The lantern's flame flickered blue and green, casting eerie patterns on the ground. As I reached out to touch the lantern, the shadows recoiled, shrieking as if repelled by its presence. Samuel pulled me back. "It's a beacon, a safe zone, at least for now." Suddenly, a whisper drifted through the air, "Choose wisely, or be forever lost." The lantern flickered once more, and the shadows retreated, leaving us momentarily alone. "We need to find out what that meant," I said, staring at the lantern's strange flame. Samuel nodded. "This place is alive, and it's testing us." We sat down cautiously beside the lantern's glow, the cold wind whispering strange sounds around us. The shadows lurked just beyond its light, their flickers of movement like restless ghosts. Samuel pulled out a small notebook, the pages worn and filled with symbols I couldn't understand. "This place responds to intentions," he said quietly. "The darkness isn't just a place, it's a reflection of what we carry inside." I shivered, realizing the truth in his words. The fear, guilt, and regret we held must have shaped this nightmare realm. Suddenly, the lantern's flame pulsed, casting a swirl of color on the cracked earth. A vision appeared, an old woman with eyes as deep and dark as the void, her voice like a distant echo. "Only those who face their inner shadows can break the mirror's curse," she whispered. "Find the heart, confront your truth, or remain trapped." I clenched my fists. "What's the heart?" Samuel stared into the shifting flames. "The source. The core of this place. It's where the mirror's power flows." We rose slowly, ready to move again. The shadows stirred, uneasy as the lantern's light dimmed. "Let's go," Samuel said. "Time's running out." As we stepped away, the landscape twisted, broken buildings melting into spirals, sky bleeding into endless darkness. A chill ran down my spine. This was only the beginning. We moved through the ever-shifting landscape, each step feeling heavier than the last. The ground beneath us groaned as if alive, and the air grew thick with whispers, half-formed words, echoes of forgotten memories. Samuel tightened his grip on the lantern, casting light on strange symbols etched into the crumbling walls. "These markings," he murmured, "are warnings. The deeper we go, the more dangerous it becomes." Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the shadows. A shape emerged, something twisted and broken, with eyes glowing like burning embers. It lunged at us, and I barely dodged. "Run!" Samuel shouted. We sprinted through winding corridors of darkness, the creature's snarls chasing us like a nightmare made flesh. The lantern flickered wildly, threatening to go out. Ahead, a faint glow beckoned, a door carved from ancient stone, covered in vines that pulsed with an eerie light. "This must be it," Samuel gasped, pushing the door open. Inside was a chamber filled with mirrors, dozens of them, each reflecting not our faces, but scenes from our pasts. Painful moments, regrets, forgotten dreams. The heart of the mirror's curse. "We have to face these," Samuel said, his voice trembling. "Or we'll never escape." I swallowed my fear and stepped forward, ready to confront the shadows within. As I stared into the mirror, the reflection shifted. Instead of my face, I saw a memory, a day long buried. The sound of my mother's voice calling me, her smile fading into tears. The moment I left home, chasing dreams, leaving behind promises I never kept. A lump formed in my throat. The reflection twisted, showing moments I tried to forget, the harsh words exchanged, the silence that grew between us. Samuel's voice broke through the haze. "It's not just about seeing the past. You have to confront it. Forgive yourself." I reached out, touching the cold glass. The surface rippled like water, and suddenly, I was no longer an observer, I was inside the memory, feeling the pain as if it were real. Nearby, Samuel faced his own mirror, his face pale and eyes wide with torment. The room began to spin, the mirrors multiplying, surrounding us with endless reflections. Each one screamed our fears, our guilt, our deepest regrets. But as I focused, I felt something shift inside me, a release, a breaking of chains I didn't even know I wore. The mirrors cracked, shards falling like rain. The oppressive air lifted. Samuel looked at me, his breath shaky but hopeful. "We've started to break the curse." The chamber's glow dimmed, and a new path opened before us, a narrow staircase leading upward, toward freedom, or perhaps something even darker. Steeling myself, I took the first step onto the narrow staircase, Samuel right behind me. Each step echoed loudly in the silence, the walls tightening around us like a vice. The air grew colder, and a faint whispering filled the space, voices tangled in sorrow and rage. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision, elusive and mocking. Halfway up, the stairs abruptly ended at a heavy iron door, cold and unyielding. I reached out, fingers trembling, and pushed. The door creaked open, revealing a vast chamber filled with old photographs pinned to the walls, faces staring back at us, eyes hollow and pleading. Among them, I spotted my own family, childhood moments I barely remembered, smiles frozen in time, and darker images, photos of my mother, looking distraught, clutching a letter stained with tears. Samuel stepped closer, tracing one picture with his finger. This is where the curse feeds, on forgotten pain, on broken promises. I swallowed hard. So, to break free, we have to face every piece. He nodded grimly. And heal what's left. The whispers grew louder, voices overlapping, each begging for attention, for acknowledgement. I felt their weight pressing down on me. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, touching the first photograph. Suddenly, I was pulled into the scene, the sound of rain against the window, my mother's quiet sobs. This time, I didn't turn away. I whispered, "I'm sorry." A warmth spread through me, and the photograph glowed softly before fading away. One by one, Samuel and I faced the photos, unraveling years of pain, guilt, and silence. As the last image disappeared, the chamber brightened, the whispers turning into soft sighs of relief. The path ahead now shone with golden light, leading us upward, toward the final escape. With the chamber's light guiding us, we climbed the remaining steps, feeling the oppressive weight lift bit by bit. The air was lighter now, the whispers replaced by a gentle hum of peace. At the top, we reached a narrow hallway lined with old wooden doors. Each one seemed to pulse faintly, as if guarding secrets waiting to be unlocked. Samuel stopped at the first door. "These are the memories, locked away, but still holding power. We need to open them, face what's inside." I nodded, steeling myself. The first door creaked open to reveal a room bathed in dim, flickering candlelight. Inside, I saw a younger version of my mother, sitting alone, writing a letter, the same letter stained in the photograph. Suddenly, the scene shifted and I was there with her, feeling her loneliness and fear, her desperation to protect us. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I reached out, touching her shoulder. "I know." The scene faded, and the door shut behind me. The pulse weakened. One by one, we opened the remaining doors, stepping into the memories they held, moments of pain, love, regret, and hope. Each door closed behind us, the pulse fading further, the darkness retreating. At last, only one door remained, larger, more ornate, its surface cracked and worn. Samuel looked at me with a mix of fear and determination. "This is it. The root of everything." I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside was a mirror, cracked and fogged, reflecting not just my image but something darker lurking behind me. The air grew thick with tension. This was the heart of the curse. I stepped forward, facing my own reflection, ready to confront the last piece of the puzzle. As I stared into the fractured mirror, the shadows behind my reflection began to swirl and shift, coalescing into a vague, humanoid form. It felt like the weight of all the suppressed memories and pain was embodied there, something ancient, sorrowful, and angry. Samuel whispered, "That's the curse itself. It feeds on pain and silence. To break it, you have to face it without fear." My heart pounded, but I knew there was no turning back. I raised my hand and touched the cold surface of the mirror. Suddenly, the world twisted. The mirror's cracks splintered light everywhere, and I was pulled inside, a realm of shadows and echoes. Voices surrounded me, my mother's cries, the old tenant's warnings, the angry whispers from the attic. All the pain and fear intertwined in a chilling chorus. "Why did you lock us away?" I demanded, voice shaking but firm. "What do you want from me?" The shadowy figure morphed, showing glimpses of a young woman, my mother's face, but twisted by sorrow and anger. "I was trapped," the figure whispered, "forgotten, betrayed. They abandoned me here, in darkness. I'm here now," I said softly. "You're not alone anymore. Let me help you." Slowly, the shadows began to dissolve, the oppressive weight lifting. Light filtered through the cracks, and the realm began to brighten. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the room with Samuel. The mirror was whole again, clear and shining. "The curse is broken," Samuel said with relief. "You freed her." A calm peace settled over the apartment, the heavy silence replaced by a gentle warmth. I knew the past wouldn't disappear, but it no longer controlled us. We had faced the darkness, and emerged stronger. The days that followed felt almost surreal. The oppressive atmosphere that once clung to the apartment lifted, replaced by an unexpected calm. But the echoes of the past still whispered softly in my mind, reminding me that healing was a process, not a moment. Samuel and I began going through the old boxes in the attic, determined to uncover any remaining fragments of the story, anything that might give the lost woman peace. Among the dusty relics, we found a faded diary, its pages brittle but filled with heartfelt words. Reading her entries, I learned of a love that had turned sour, of dreams crushed by betrayal, and of a desperation that had bound her spirit to this place. Each page painted a portrait of a woman trapped by her own choices and the cruelty of those around her. One entry caught my eye. "If someone finds this, please know I never wanted to harm anyone. I only wished for freedom, for forgiveness." It struck me deeply. This wasn't just a haunting, it was a plea. A soul reaching out for release from its own torment. With renewed purpose, Samuel and I decided to hold a small ceremony in the apartment, honoring her memory and offering a prayer for her peace. We lit candles, spoke kind words, and let the warmth fill the once cold, shadowed rooms. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a gentle presence beside me, not threatening, but comforting. It was as if she was finally saying goodbye. The attic door remained closed, but now it felt like a threshold to a past that was finally at rest. The next morning, the apartment felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. I still kept the diary close, hoping it might guide me if anything else surfaced. But days passed without incident, no strange noises, no flickering lights, no cold drafts. Samuel seemed relieved too, his usual nervousness replaced by quiet calm. We talked about what had happened, about how sometimes the past clings to a place until someone listens and understands. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic one last time, I stumbled upon a small wooden box hidden beneath old floorboards. Inside were faded photographs, a locket, and a stack of letters tied with a ribbon. The letters were addressed to no one, written in a delicate hand filled with regret and sorrow. I felt a pang of sadness as I read them. They told a story of love lost, mistakes made, and hope for forgiveness that never came. That night, I carefully placed the box next to the diary on my bedside table. I whispered a promise that their stories wouldn't be forgotten. For now, the apartment felt like home again, no longer haunted by shadows but warmed by remembrance. But sometimes, when the wind rustled through the trees outside, I swore I could still hear a soft sigh, like a thank you carried on the breeze. Days turned into weeks, and life in the apartment settled into a peaceful rhythm. Samuel and I grew closer, our shared experience weaving an unspoken bond between us. We often talked about the past, the lives that had touched the old building, and the invisible threads that connected us all. One evening, while we were sorting through more of the attic's forgotten relics, Samuel found a small, dusty journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard. This journal belonged to a woman named Clara, the same Clara mentioned in the letters. Her entries were filled with hope and fear, dreams and despair. She wrote about a forbidden love, a secret she carried, and the heavy price she paid for it. As I read the words aloud, I could feel her presence, a woman trapped between worlds, longing to be understood. Samuel and I decided to find out more about Clara, hoping to uncover her story and finally bring her peace. We visited the local library, dug through old records, and spoke to anyone who might remember. Piece by piece, Clara's story unfolded, a tragic tale of love, betrayal, and redemption. But as we delved deeper, strange things began to happen again. Shadows flickered in the corners of our vision, whispers floated through empty rooms, and the air grew thick with anticipation. It was as if Clara's spirit was waking, ready to reveal the last, hidden truth. We learned that Clara had fallen in love with a man her family disapproved of, a painter named Elias. Their romance was passionate but secret, hidden from prying eyes. One night, Clara vanished without a trace, leaving behind only her journal and a single, unfinished painting. Locals whispered that she had been cursed, that her spirit haunted the apartment ever since, unable to move on until her story was told. The unfinished painting fascinated us. It showed a shadowy figure standing at the edge of a forest, reaching out toward a glowing light in the distance. It felt like a plea, a message waiting to be deciphered. One night, after hours in the attic, I felt a cold breeze brush past me. I turned and saw a faint outline of a woman, Clara's spirit, standing by the window, her eyes full of sorrow and hope. Samuel and I promised her we would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. But the deeper we dug, the more we realized some secrets were meant to stay buried. As days passed, Samuel and I scoured every archive, every old letter and photograph we could find about Clara and Elias. Slowly, a darker picture emerged. Elias wasn't just a painter, he was rumored to be involved with a secretive group obsessed with ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge. One letter, yellowed with age and tucked inside an old book, spoke of a pact Elias had made, something that promised great artistic power, but demanded a terrible price. The night we found this letter, the attic felt colder than ever. Shadows seemed to twist unnaturally, and an eerie whisper filled the air, almost like a warning. We had crossed a line. That night, I dreamed of Clara standing at the edge of the forest from the painting, calling to me, her voice urgent and fragile. She begged us to finish what Elias had started, but warned of the danger if we failed. Waking up, I knew we couldn't turn back. The mystery was alive, and so was the darkness waiting to consume us. We decided to return to the attic with the letter and some tools, a notebook, camera, and a small recorder. Our plan was to document everything and, if possible, uncover what Elias had hidden there. As soon as we stepped into the attic, the air grew thick and heavy, like breathing through a wet cloth. The walls, once just wooden planks, now seemed alive with faded symbols scratched deep into the grain. I felt eyes watching me, invisible but unblinking. Samuel traced his fingers over one symbol, a jagged shape resembling a serpent biting its own tail. "This must be the seal," he whispered. Suddenly, the floorboards creaked beneath us. From the far corner, a faint glow pulsed, soft blue, like moonlight caught in glass. Approaching cautiously, we found a small hidden compartment beneath a loose board. Inside was a dusty, leather-bound journal, Elias's. Opening it, I saw frantic notes, sketches of strange figures, and warnings scrawled in the margins. One page was soaked with dark red stains, almost like dried blood. The last entry chilled me to the bone. "Tonight I will open the gate. If I fail, may whoever finds this be strong enough to close it." As I read the words aloud, the attic plunged into darkness, and a cold wind howled through the cracks. We weren't alone. The darkness pressed in around us, thick and suffocating. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my flashlight, its weak beam barely piercing the shadows. Samuel whispered urgently, "We need to find that gate he mentioned." The journal hinted the gate was hidden behind a false wall near the attic's back corner. We moved cautiously, guided by the faint glow still pulsing beneath the floorboards. Suddenly, the creaking floor shifted again, but this time it was closer, circling us, like something moving just beyond sight. I caught a glimpse of something, shadowy, flickering, at the edge of my vision. The air grew colder, and a low hum began to fill the space, vibrating through the wooden beams. Samuel pressed against the wall, feeling for a seam. "Here," he breathed. He pushed a loose panel aside, revealing a narrow doorway beyond it. A chilling draft escaped from the opening. We exchanged a glance. This was it. Steeling ourselves, we stepped through into a narrow stairwell spiraling down into pitch-black darkness. The recorder caught a distant whisper, soft, beckoning, unintelligible, but unmistakably there. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Samuel nodded, gripping my arm. "We have to keep going." With every step down, the temperature dropped further. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing thicker, denser. Then, the stairs ended in a heavy iron door, etched with the same serpent symbol from the attic walls. Samuel pushed it open. Beyond was a cavernous chamber lit by flickering torches, the air thick with an oppressive energy. In the center, a swirling vortex of shadow and light churned, a portal, alive and pulsing. "The gate," Elias wrote about. And something stirred inside. The chamber felt like the heart of some ancient secret, a place untouched by time yet alive with a darkness that seemed to breathe. As we stood there, the portal's swirling depths beckoned with a silent promise of truths best left buried. Samuel and I exchanged a glance, the kind that spoke volumes without words. We both knew we had crossed a line from which there was no easy return. The air grew heavy, every breath a labor. Shadows danced along the rough stone walls, contorting into faces I was sure weren't mine. The torches flickered violently as if warning us, as if the very flames feared the power we had uncovered. I took a step closer, compelled by a force beyond understanding. The portal's surface rippled, reflecting not just the torchlight, but strange, fleeting images, flickers of memories, whispers of souls trapped between worlds. I reached out my hand. My fingers trembled as they neared the shimmering veil. "Wait," Samuel's voice broke the trance. "We don't know what's on the other side." But the urge was overwhelming. Something primal stirred inside me, a pull to understand, to confront whatever secrets lurked beyond. Just as my fingertips brushed the portal, the chamber trembled violently. Dust rained down from the ceiling. A low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows beyond the torchlight. Suddenly, the portal flashed blinding white, then black, then a chaotic swirl of colors that twisted reality itself. The vortex roared like a beast unleashed. Samuel grabbed my arm, his grip fierce. "We have to get out of here," he shouted. The ground shook beneath our feet, and the chamber seemed to fold in on itself. I tore my gaze away from the hypnotic chaos of the portal. Together, we ran, stumbling, breathless, back toward the narrow stairwell. Behind us, the portal's roar grew louder, an unearthly scream that clawed at the edges of sanity. We reached the iron door and slammed it shut just as the chamber behind us imploded in a thunderous crash. The entire stairwell shuddered, then fell silent, as if the ancient place itself was holding its breath. For a moment, we stood frozen, the heavy silence wrapping around us like a shroud. "Did we close it?" I whispered, voice barely audible. Samuel nodded, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. "I think so. But whatever that was, it's not gone." We climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing louder than the last. The attic felt different, smaller, less threatening, but the oppressive presence lingered, like a shadow at the edge of vision. Outside, the first light of dawn began to filter through the grimy window. We paused, catching our breath, overwhelmed by the weight of what we'd discovered. The journal was in my hands, its pages no longer just words, but warnings. We had glimpsed something ancient and terrible, a power that defied understanding. And now, that darkness was a part of us. Back in the safety of my apartment, I placed the journal on the table, its leather cover worn but heavy with meaning. Samuel sat beside me, exhaustion etched into his features. "We have to tell someone," he said quietly. This is bigger than us." But who would believe us? A story about a secret gate, shadowy portals, and voices from beyond. It sounded like a nightmare. Yet, it was all real. I glanced out the window at the waking city, unaware of the hidden horrors beneath its surface. One thing was certain, I would never look at the world the same way again. The attic above apartment 3B was no longer just a forgotten space, it was a gateway to something unimaginable. And some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the shadows. If you enjoyed the story and want to hear more chilling tales, be sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video, it really helps me bring more stories your way. Until next time, stay safe, keep your doors locked, and good night.